Today we're venturing deep into the heart of Texas, where the land is as vast as its legends, and just as terrifying. From eerie lights haunting dark rivers to ancient forces that never should have been disturbed, get ready for 20 of the creepiest true Texas rest stop horror stories that will make you question what's real and what's lurking just beyond the horizon. But before we begin, here's something strange. Most viewers make one huge mistake: they leave without subscribing. And by doing so, they miss out on the creepiest, spine-tingling tales that only the bravest dare to hear. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button now. Because tonight's just the beginning, and the terror waiting in the darkness is far from over. So, where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Let me know in the comments, because here, the night is only getting started, and the horror is waiting to unfold. Now let's dive into the darkness. I was driving down I-35 that night with my rig humming steady under me, the glow of Waco still behind on the horizon, and the road stretching black and endless ahead. The hours were long and the miles monotonous, but I've been at this job most of my life, and I've learned how to settle into the rhythm, how to let the hum of tires on asphalt become a kind of heartbeat. Around 3 in the morning, though, no amount of black coffee or country radio could keep my eyelids from sagging. I spotted the glow of a rest stop coming up, one of those small ones with a handful of picnic tables, a restroom building, and a row of humming vending machines tucked under buzzing fluorescent lights. I pulled off, figuring I'd grab a Coke and stretch my legs before pushing on toward Dallas. The rest stop was empty. Not another rig, not a single car in the lot. The air was humid, thick with the smell of hot asphalt that never seemed to cool even at night, and cicadas screamed from the trees beyond the faint circle of light. The vending machines sat in a row, their fronts lit up in cheerful neon, promising candy bars and potato chips like they were trying too hard to lure travelers. I killed my engine and climbed down, feeling the night close in quiet and heavy the moment the rumble of the truck faded. That's when I saw her. She was standing just at the far end of the vending machine row, barefoot, her white nightgown ripped and hanging loose from one shoulder. The gown looked damp at the hem, clinging to her ankles like she'd walked through dew-soaked grass, except there was no grass, just the cracked pavement of the rest stop and scrubby patches of dirt. Her hair was long, dark, tangled in a way that made me think of brambles. She wasn't doing anything, just standing there, half in shadow, staring at me. Now, I've seen all kinds of strange people at rest stops. Folks who'd had too much meth, people down on their luck, hitchhikers who didn't make sense, but this was different. She wasn't moving, wasn't shifting her weight or fidgeting like a normal person might. Just still, like she was fixed there. I raised my hand and gave a quick half wave, trying not to look like I was rattled. "You all right, ma'am?" I called out, keeping my voice steady. No response. She didn't blink, didn't even flinch. Just stood there like a mannequin someone had left by the machines. Something about her stillness crawled under my skin. My throat felt dry, and for the first time that night I was aware of how empty the rest stop was, how far it was to the next exit, and how there was nothing but dark Texas fields stretching out around us. I took a step closer, telling myself, maybe she needed help. She looked young, mid-20s maybe, but her eyes caught the light in a way that froze me. They were pale, washed out, almost gray, and they didn't seem to follow me so much as look through me. "Do you need me to call someone?" I asked, but my voice felt too loud in the silence. The vending machine nearest to me hummed and clunked, as if something inside shifted on its own. I glanced at it, then back to her. She hadn't moved. I shoved a couple quarters into the Coke machine just to have something normal to focus on, punched the button, and waited for the can to drop. When it did, the sound echoed too loud in the night. I bent to grab it, and when I stood back up, she was closer. Not walking, not moving, just closer. She was now 2 machines away instead of 5. I froze, the can sweating in my hand. My first thought was that I was tired, maybe misjudging the distance, but I know what I saw. She hadn't taken a step. No shuffle of bare feet on concrete, no sound at all. But she was closer. The Coke didn't even taste right going down. My mouth felt like cotton. I told myself I'd just get back in the truck and go. Nothing keeping me here. Just some strange woman at a rest stop, and I didn't need to figure it out. I turned, started back toward my rig. Behind me, the sound of plastic buttons being pressed clattered from the vending machine row. I turned instinctively, and there she was, right in front of the glass, her hand flat against it, eyes boring into the candy bars like she'd never seen food before. The nightgown sleeve slipped down her arm, exposing skin that looked almost blue in the fluorescent glow, like she was cold or dead. I didn't wait to see more. I climbed into my rig, slammed the door, and locked it. My heart was racing like I'd just pulled out of a near miss on the interstate. I sat there gripping the steering wheel, telling myself I was being stupid, that she was just some lost woman, maybe sleepwalking from a nearby house. But the rest stop was miles from any house, and I couldn't shake the way she'd gotten closer without moving. I cranked the engine and pulled back onto the highway, glancing into the side mirror as the rest stop lights slid away behind me. For a split second, I swore I saw her standing right at the edge of the pavement where the light ended, her head turning slowly as my truck rolled away, still staring straight at me. The next day, I mentioned it on the CB, half joking, trying to brush it off. Another driver keyed up, said he'd seen the same woman. "By the machines?" he asked. "Around 3 a.m? His voice was shaky, like he didn't want to admit it. Another driver chimed in, then another. All the same story. A woman in a torn nightgown, barefoot, standing by the vending machines, never saying a word. Somebody said the dot had checked the security cameras. Nothing there. The machines lit up, the lot empty. No woman. Just an endless reel of silence. I told myself I wouldn't stop at that rest area again, no matter how tired I was. But a few weeks later, I passed it around the same hour. Couldn't help glancing over as I drove by. The lot was empty, lights buzzing over the machines. But for a moment, I thought I saw her again, just a pale shape in the glow, head tilted, watching. I pressed the gas harder, because some things you don't want to understand. Some things out on the Texas highways don't belong in daylight, and I wasn't about to be the one to figure out what she wanted. Highway 287 cuts across North Texas in a long, flat stretch that feels like it was poured straight through the prairie, without much thought to the land itself. Wichita Falls sits on that line like a weathered knot in a piece of old rope. Its light scattered and half dim against the endless dark. Travelers who know the road well often stop outside town at one of the motels or truck stops that crouch along the shoulder. It's the kind of place where the hum of long-haul semis is constant, and the smell of asphalt and diesel mixes with dust. Nights out there are heavy and still, and when the wind carries across the plains, it brings with it a sound like far-off whispers, low and dry. That night, I was one of those travelers. I had pulled into a worn-out rest stop a little past midnight, the kind with a few vending machines under buzzing fluorescent lights and a row of picnic tables scarred with initials carved decades ago. My plan was simple enough: rest a few hours before driving the last stretch to Amarillo. I cut the engine and leaned back in my seat, letting the silence wrap around me. Only it wasn't really silence. The highway was quiet at that hour, but not empty. Every so often, headlights cut through, and the sound of tires on asphalt would rise, fade, and vanish. Then, maybe 20 minutes into my half-sleep, I heard the first one. Screeching tires, sharp and violent, the kind that makes your chest tighten instinctively because you're already bracing for impact. Then came the crash, a heavy, metallic shatter, glass exploding outward, the kind of sound that rips through the night like a scream. I bolted upright, heart hammering, eyes on the road. Nothing. The highway stretched out empty in both directions, its dark ribbon unbroken. No smoke, no lights, no twisted hulk of metal. Just silence again, so thick it felt staged. I told myself I must have dreamed it, the noise blending with half-conscious thought. But the sound had been too sharp, too real. I got out of the car, standing in the warm night air, and waited. The vending machines hummed, the cicadas buzzed. Nothing else. I almost convinced myself it was nothing, until it happened again. Tires, screeching, closer this time, like a car had lost control on the stretch in front of me. The crash was louder, crunching into something unseen, I sprinted toward the road, my shoes hitting the gravel, eyes wide for a wreck. The highway was as bare as before. No debris, no skid marks. The air smelled faintly of burnt rubber, but it carried no smoke. That smell clung, though, faint and sour, impossible to ignore. I backed away, unsettled. A trucker in a Peterbilt had pulled in while I was out there, and he climbed down from his cab slowly, like he was testing the ground. His face was hollow in the glow of his cab light. "You heard it too," he said, no hint of question in his voice. He looked past me toward the road. "Been hearing it every damn night I stop here. Tires screaming, steel crunching. Sometimes you'll swear you see headlights spinning out, rolling. But there's never nothing there. Never." He shook his head, rubbing the back of his neck. "Locals say a pileup happened on this stretch back in the 70s. Fog rolled in thick one night, blinded drivers. Cars stacked one after another, 18-wheelers plowing right through. People burned. Folks screamed for hours while the wreckage burned. They cleared the bodies, paved over it, but..." His words trailed off. He didn't need to finish. The night around us seemed to listen in, holding its breath. That should have been enough to make me get in my car and leave. But curiosity has a way of digging in. I wanted to see it happen, or at least prove it was some trick of the ears. I told myself I'd wait, just one more time. The trucker shook, his head at me like I was a fool, then climbed back into his cab and shut the door. I leaned against the hood of my car, staring at the blacktop. Minutes stretched thin. Then came the sound again, so loud it made me flinch, screeching tires squealing across the night. Headlights flared suddenly, 2, then 4, then 6, bearing down fast like a wave of oncoming traffic. But the beams weren't steady. They spun, rolled, shot up into the air. Metal slammed against metal in a shriek that tore at my ears. Glass burst, sparks rained, a horn blared endlessly before cutting off. I braced for impact even though nothing was there. My body was shaking before I realized I had stumbled back, staring wide-eyed at the empty highway. The lights were gone. The road lay clean, untouched, dark as it had been before. My chest heaved. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. I got back into my car, hands trembling against the steering wheel. The trucker's rig sat still, but I could see his curtain pulled shut tight. He was ignoring it, pretending maybe it wasn't there. I wanted to do the same, but something caught my eye in the rear view. On the asphalt behind me, glowing faintly, in the moonlight were streaks. Long, dark skid marks etched into the pavement. They hadn't been there when I first arrived. They led off toward the shoulder, vanishing into gravel. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes, looked again. Still there. The air smelled thick now, pungent with gasoline and fire, though no flames burned. My instincts screamed to drive, to get as far from Highway 287 as possible, but when I turned the key, the engine hesitated, coughed, and died. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It carried a sound beneath it, faint at first, then rising like a tide. Screams. Human voices layered over each other, shouting, crying, pleading, shrieking in pain. It filled the cabin of my car, pressed against my skull, leaking through the glass. I covered my ears, but it didn't help. It was inside me. I don't remember leaving the rest stop, only that I found myself flying down the highway at 80 miles an hour, heart slamming so hard I thought I'd pass out. The road ahead was empty, yet I couldn't shake the feeling I was barreling through smoke I couldn't see, weaving through wreckage that wasn't there anymore. When I finally hit Amarillo, I pulled into a gas station and sat there with the engine running, headlights on the pump, until the sun began to rise. I didn't sleep, I couldn't. I've never taken 287 through Wichita Falls again. But sometimes, on quiet nights when the house settles and the wind dies, I swear I hear it. Tires screaming, steel folding, voices caught in an endless crash that never ends. And when I do, the smell of burnt rubber creeps back into the room, faint and sour, like the road has found me again. Highway 67 outside San Angelo runs flat and lonely at night. The blacktop stretching past scrub and mesquite under a sky so wide, it feels like you might fall upward into it if you looked too long. I'd been driving back from a job in Midland, bone-tired and fighting off that heavy-eyed daze that comes when the road hums beneath your tires for hours without change. When I saw the blue rest area sign glow in my headlights, it felt like a reprieve. The kind of place you pull over, stretch your legs, maybe splash water on your face before pushing through the last couple hours. It was nearly midnight. Cool. For West Texas in early spring. The air sharp with a hint of cedar and the faint, oily tang of asphalt warming and cooling. The rest area lights shone pale over empty picnic tables and cracked concrete pads. I parked my truck beneath one of the lamps and cut the engine, letting the hum of the highway fade into a stillness broken only by wind scraping dry grass. That was when I saw it. A baby stroller. It was parked beside one of the tables about 20 yards away. Not tipped over, not abandoned in a rush, but set there deliberately, like someone had wheeled it up for a late-night picnic. It was an older model, fabric faded gray-blue, the kind with a metal frame that caught the light in thin, sharp lines. It was empty. The sight of it snagged my mind like barbed wire. The place was deserted. I hadn't passed another car in miles. Hadn't seen taillights or headlights since I'd turned off the loop around San Angelo. Yet there it sat, wheels locked in place, handlebar pointing toward the table, as if someone had stepped away only moments ago. I told myself it wasn't my business. I was tired, too tired to play hero to someone else's weirdness. But something about that stroller pulled at me. Maybe it was the way it seemed staged, not forgotten, waiting. I climbed out of the truck, gravel crunching under my boots, and the night closed in heavier without the windshield between me and it. The air smelled faintly of dust and creosote, and my footsteps seemed too loud as I walked toward the table. The closer I got, the stranger it felt. The stroller wasn't dirty. No dust settled on the fabric, no cobwebs laced its handles. This thing hadn't been sitting here long. I stopped beside it and glanced around. The highway ran dark in both directions, nothing but a ribbon of moonlit black. Behind the rest area stretched low brush, clumps of mesquite trees, and further, still pasture land marked by barbed wire fence. Silent, empty. I leaned closer, checking the seat. No toys, no blanket, no straps buckled, just an empty cradle of fabric, shadows pooling deep. And then, I swear, I heard it. A sound like wheels squeaking faintly, though the stroller didn't move. My stomach tightened, that primitive dread, coiling before logic could untangle it. I turned fast, scanning the lot. Nothing. My truck. The lights buzzing overhead. The concrete bathroom building across the way, door shut, painted state-issue beige. No cars, no people. And yet the air carried weight, like eyes were on me. I forced a laugh under my breath, told myself I was spooking. Probably some family stopped earlier, forgot the stroller when they left. That was all. But why at midnight? Why leave it so neatly parked? I circled it once, and that's when I saw the receipt. A small slip of thermal paper tucked under the stroller's front wheel like it had been placed there on purpose. I bent down and plucked it free. It was a gas station receipt from San Angelo, time-stamped June 12, 1997. I blinked at it. That was almost 30 years ago. The ink was faded but legible, the paper brittle. I stood there in the glow of the lamp holding a piece of paper older than I'd been when it was printed, placed beneath a stroller that looked barely used. The night pressed closer, wind sighing through the brush. I felt it before I heard it. A shift in the air, subtle, like someone had stepped close behind me. Then a soft breath unmistakable against the back of my neck. I spun, heart hammering, but there was nothing. Nothing but the hiss of the lamp overhead and the empty road stretching endless. My hand shook as I shoved the receipt in my pocket. Something in me screamed to get back to the truck, to leave the stroller and whatever strange trick it carried. But I lingered, caught in the web of it. That's when the sound came again. A faint squeal of wheels. Only this time, the stroller rocked forward. Just once. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my boots. My throat went dry, words catching there useless. The stroller stood where it had, shadowed under the lamp, but its front wheels were angled differently now, turned toward me. I wanted to believe it was wind, except the air was still. I stepped back once, twice, and the stroller creaked again, its fabric shifting as though a weight had just settled into it. I ran. No shame in it. I bolted for my truck, gravel scattering underfoot, lungs burning though I'd barely sprinted 20 yards. I yanked the door open, climbed in, and slammed the locks down. My fingers fumbled the keys, heart punching my ribs. When the engine roared to life, I didn't glance back. Not at the stroller, not at the tables. I threw the truck in reverse, tires spitting gravel, then onto the highway, accelerator pressed hard. The rest area dropped behind in my mirrors, swallowed by night. I told myself not to look, but I did. One last glance. Under the harsh white glow of the lamp, the stroller was gone. Just gone. Nothing beside that picnic table but shadow and concrete. I gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles burned, staring ahead, the black ribbon of Highway 67 pulling me away. For miles I drove without blinking, my chest heaving like I'd run for hours. Eventually the adrenaline thinned, replaced by the cold awareness of what sat in my pocket, that slip of paper. When I finally pulled into my driveway 2 hours later, house lights dark and porch quiet, I couldn't shake it. I sat there in the cab, engine ticking as it cooled, and drew the receipt out. My thumb traced the faded numbers. Gasoline, $23.17, pump 2. June 12, 1997. But beneath the printed lines in ballpoint pen, there was something else I hadn't noticed before. 4 words scrawled uneven and smudged like written by hand that trembled. Bring the baby back. I don't know what to do with that. I've kept it hidden in a drawer ever since, telling myself I'll throw it out, but every time I try, I can't. I can still smell the faint burnt dust scent of that rest area lamp, still hear the squeal of wheels turning in silence. And sometimes, late at night, parked trucks will pass my street, brakes sighing low, engines idling a moment too long. When I look out the window, I swear I see it waiting there at the end of the drive. That old gray-blue stroller, parked neat beneath the glow of the streetlight. Empty. Waiting. On US 59, just south of Lufkin, where the pines lean in close enough to muffle the highway noise, there's a rest stop most folks don't bother with unless their eyelids are dropping and there's nowhere else to pull off. It's nothing special. Just a wide loop of asphalt with a few picnic tables under tin roof shelters, a dim vending machine glowing against the brick wall of the bathroom building, and a couple of sodium lights that do more to sharpen the darkness, then drive it back. I've passed it 100 times in daylight and never thought much about it. But the night I saw the van, I was bone tired, driving home from a job in Houston, and I couldn't keep my eyes open any longer. The first time I noticed it was in my rearview mirror, maybe half a mile from the rest stop exit. Old van, boxy, the kind Chevy or Ford made back in the late 70s. The paint looked dull, a faded blue with spots that might have been rust, if the light had been better. No headlights, just a shadow gliding on the edge of the lane. I thought it was some idiot drunk or a farm truck with the lights out, so I slowed down, hoping they'd pass me. But they never did. I took the exit, figuring I'd grab a few minutes of shut-eye, and the van kept coming, following me off. The loop of the rest stop curls around the trees one way in and the same way out, and as I pulled into a spot near the vending machine, I expected the van to stop too. Instead, it just kept moving, rolling along the loop without so much as a flicker from its brake lights. I sat there with the engine off, window cracked to the night sounds, the cicadas droning, a far-off semi-downshifting on the main highway, and I watched that blue van circle, once, twice, 3 times, slow, steady, like it was measuring the, place, like it was waiting for something. The weirdest part was I never heard tires on gravel or the hum of an engine, just silence, broken only by the night. At first I told myself it had to be another tired driver too restless to stop. Maybe he was looking for someone, a friend to caravan with, or maybe he was too wired to park. But the longer I sat, the stranger it felt. On the 4th lap, I squinted to see if I could make out the driver. The sodium lights caught the windshield, but there was nothing behind the glass. No silhouette, no motion. just black, like the inside was hollow. My gut tightened, and I realized I didn't want to look too close. I leaned back in my seat, heart beating fast, and thought maybe I'd just put the key back in the ignition and get the hell out. But I was so tired, and the thought of white-lining it all the way to Nacogdoches half asleep scared me almost as much as that van. It circled again. Always the same path, hugging the outside edge of the loop. Never slowing, never leaving. I thought about other cars pulling in, maybe someone else noticing, but in the hour I sat there, not a soul came. Just me and that van making its endless rounds. I tried to shake it off, told myself it was some quirk of fatigue, my mind playing tricks. But when I finally dozed off against the window, it followed me into sleep. Dreams of circling wheels, of being watched from an empty driver's seat, of headlights that refused to shine. When I woke, the sun was bleeding up through the trees and the van was gone. The lot was empty except for my truck. I should have been relieved, but instead I felt cold, like I'd lost time. My watch said I'd only been asleep 30 minutes, but the shadows told a different story. I left quick, barely awake, and I told myself never again would I stop there. But the thing is, I've heard since then from 2 different people, truckers who run that stretch, that they've seen it. 2, always the same. An old blue van circling the rest stop at night, headlights off, engine silent, never pulling in, never leaving, just moving in a loop like it's trapped there. One swore that when he blinked, it jumped ahead, like it didn't. Drive the ground between just skipped it. Another said he parked once like me, and when he woke, there were tracks in the dirt all around his rig. Too many to count, as if the van had circled him again and again while he slept. I don't know what it is. Some folks say it's a ghost, the remnant of a family that vanished on that highway decades back, their van found wrecked and empty down in a creek bed. Others mutter about things older than the highway, about spirits that latch onto machines the way they once haunted rivers or trees. All I know is, when I pass that rest stop now, I press harder on the gas, eyes straight ahead, and every time, I feel the weight of something pacing me just out of sight, waiting for me to get tired enough to stop again. I was 17 the night I stopped at that rest area off I-10 near Junction, heading west after a long day of driving with my uncle. We'd been in San Antonio visiting family, and I was the one behind the wheel because my uncle had dozed off. After supper, it was about 2 in the morning. The highway mostly empty except for the occasional 18-wheeler humming past in the opposite direction. The headlights stretched across the asphalt in those long silver streaks, and the desert, air outside the cracked window was cool with the faint smell of cedar and dust. I remember how relieved I was to see the blue rest area sign flickering in the headlights, promising bathrooms and vending machines. My eyelids felt heavy, and the gas station coffee I'd picked up hours earlier wasn't doing me any favors. I pulled off onto the quiet little loop, gravel crunching under the tires, and parked near the dim concrete building where the lights buzzed overhead like tired insects. The rest stop was empty, which didn't surprise me given the hour. A single Coke machine glowed red against the wall, its hum filling the silence. The air smelled faintly of piss and wet concrete, and the fluorescent lights inside the bathroom flickered just enough to make me hesitate before stepping in. I told myself it was just a quick pit stop, nothing more. My uncle snored softly in the passenger seat as I left the truck idling, headlights cutting across the picnic tables and dark trees beyond. The bathroom door groaned when I pushed it open, and the smell hit me like a slap. That mix of bleach, urine, and stale water you only find in places like that. Inside it was brighter, but the flicker of the lights played tricks with the shadows. In the corners, I noticed right away how the place carried sound. My footsteps echoed sharp against the tile, and even the squeak of the door shutting behind me felt unnaturally loud. There were 4 stalls lined up against the back wall, metal, doors scratched with graffiti, and a row of sinks with mirrors clouded by streaks and age. I headed for the second stall from the end, figuring it looked the cleanest, and latched the door behind me. Everything seemed normal enough at first. I was just relieved to stretch my legs and relieve myself after the long drive. Then I heard it on the squeak of the stall door next to mine swinging open. I froze. My heart gave a quick jump because I hadn't seen or heard anyone else enter. The place had been empty when I walked in. The door clanged shut, the sound echoing like it belonged to a much larger space. I told myself it was fine. Someone else had come in and I just hadn't noticed. Still, the hair on my arms prickled. I could see the faint shadow of feet through the gap at the bottom of the partition. Boots, heavy ones. They shifted slightly, the toes pointing directly at my stall, not angled the way someone's feet usually are when they're just sitting down. I stared at those boots, barely breathing, and the strangest thought crept in. Whoever was standing there wasn't moving at all. No rustle of clothes, no sound of breathing, no shuffling. Just stillness. My pulse picked up, pounding hard in my ears. I bent down, slowly, as quietly as I could, pretending to reach for some toilet paper just so I could get a better look. The feet were still there, but the shadow didn't look right. It was darker than it should have been, too sharp and heavy against the floor even with the buzzing lights above. I leaned forward, squinting, and then I realized something that made my stomach lurch. The feet weren't casting a shadow at all. They were the shadow. Pure black shapes pressed flat against the tile but standing upright, like the idea of boots, more than boots themselves. I shot back upright, slammed my eyes shut for a second, and told myself I was exhausted and imagining things. When I opened them, the shadow still hadn't moved. I swallowed, trying to build up the nerve, and finally reached out to unlatch the door. My fingers were trembling as I pushed it open. The stall beside mine was empty, completely empty. I swung the door wide, the hinges squealing, but there was nothing. No boots, no shadow, just stained porcelain and silence. My mouth went dry as I stepped out, turning in a quick circle, but the bathroom was deserted. Every stall door hung open except mine. I felt stupid, like I was scaring myself for no reason. I washed my hands fast, the water spitting weakly from the faucet, and tried not to look into the mirror above the sink. Something in me didn't want to see my own reflection in that place. As I turned to leave, I heard it again, the metallic squeak of a stall door. I whipped around, and for a split second I saw it. A dark shape standing in the end stall, tall and thin, its head nearly brushing the top of the door. No features, no face. Just a man-shaped shadow filling the space where no one had been a second before. My breath caught in my throat, and then the lights overhead buzzed louder, flickered, and when they steadied again, the stall was empty. Every door was hanging open again. I didn't wait around. I bolted out of there, the heavy bathroom door slamming behind me, and ran back to the truck. My uncle stirred when I climbed in, breathing hard, but he didn't wake fully. I put the truck in drive and got us back on the highway, white-knuckling the steering wheel the whole way. My eyes kept darting to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something in the back seat. The highway stretched out ahead of me, black and endless, and the wind outside howled like it was chasing us. I told myself I was tired, that it was just my brain playing tricks. But even now, all these years later, I can still see the shape in that stall, still hear the squeak of the door. And when I think about it too long, I can almost feel that presence standing just behind me, waiting for me to glance into a mirror again. I was driving west on I-20 toward Abilene late one humid June night, the kind of night where the sky doesn't turn completely black, but holds onto a bruised violet haze, like the horizon itself is waiting for something to happen. My wife and kids were asleep in the back of the car, and I had the radio down low so it wouldn't wake them. Somewhere near Clyde, I felt that bone-deep weariness setting in, the kind where your eyelids weigh heavy as lead and every mile marker seems farther apart than the last. I saw a rest area sign a few miles ahead and figured I'd pull in, stretch my legs, maybe splash some water on my face before pushing through the last hour to Abilene. The rest stop looked like any other Texas roadside pull-off, a cracked lot, with a scattering of big rigs idling on one end, a picnic area with those squat concrete tables under metal awnings, vending machines that always seemed half-broken. The fluorescent lights buzzed against the night, and moths kept slamming themselves into the glass. I pulled into a spot at the far side, away from the truckers, rolled the windows down for some air, and stepped out. The air was thick with the smell of diesel and hot asphalt that still radiated the day's heat. As I stretched, I heard it. The faint sound of children laughing. Not one or two kids, but a handful, maybe 5 or 6. The way laughter rises and falls when kids are chasing each other around a playground. I froze for a second, straining my ears. It was coming from the picnic area near the tree line, just beyond the glow of the lights. The laughter was bright and sharp, the kind you expect on a Saturday afternoon at a park, not out here after midnight with no cars but mine and the trucks. At first I thought maybe a family had pulled in late. There, kids restless from being cooped up in the car. I walked toward the tables, curious, figuring I'd see a minivan with its doors open. A couple of kids running in circles while the parents smoked nearby. But as I stepped into the grass, the sound of laughter darted away like it was moving, deeper into the dark. I couldn't see a soul. The picnic table sat empty under the awnings, trash barrels overflowing with fast food wrappers, the vending machines humming. I glanced around, checked behind the restrooms, even walked toward the tree line, but there was no one. Then I heard it again, closer this time, light footsteps slapping against concrete, kids shouting, "You're it," followed by more laughter. My skin prickled. I knew what I was hearing, but the rest stop was empty. I backed up toward the car, half telling myself I was overtired, hearing things the way your brain plays tricks when you're too tired to think straight. I leaned against the hood, rubbed my face, and that's when I saw it. Movement between the tables. Small figures darting from shadow to shadow, quick and low, like kids playing tag. My first instinct was relief. See, it's just some family after all. But then I noticed there were no cars parked nearby, no headlights, nothing that explained where these children had come from. The figures never stepped into the light. They stayed just outside the reach of the lamps, as if the brightness burned them. I caught glimpses of pale arms, hair bouncing, the flash of bare feet on concrete, but never a clear face. The laughter grew louder, echoing unnaturally in the empty night, bouncing off the vending machines and the restroom walls until it felt like it was coming from everywhere at once. I thought about calling out, "Hey, where are your parents?" But the words stuck in my throat. Something about that laughter didn't sound right anymore. It was too high, too sharp, looping over itself like a recording on repeat. My wife stirred in the car, and that's when fear really took hold of me. I didn't want whatever I was hearing to notice her or the kids. I climbed back into the driver's seat, shut the door, and locked it. My hands shook as I turned the key, trying to be quiet about it, as if the sound of my engine might draw attention. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw them. At least half a dozen small shapes now gathered in a loose circle by the picnic tables, heads cocked toward me. I couldn't make out their faces, only the pale blur of their skin. One of them tilted its head all the way sideways, too far for any child's neck. And then they all burst into shrill laughter at once. I threw the car into drive and pulled out fast, gravel popping under my tires. In the rearview mirror, the picnic area looked normal again, empty and still under the buzzing lights. But just as I passed the rest area 1 mile exit sign on the highway, I swear I heard it again, faint through the open window. Children's laughter trailing me, as if it had followed me out. I didn't stop again that night. I drove straight into Abilene with my hands locked on the wheel, knuckles white. The radio turned off because I couldn't stand any extra sound. When my wife woke up and asked why I looked so pale, I just told her I was tired, that the drive had gotten to me. I never told her about the kids at midnight. Weeks later, I mentioned it to a guy at work whose cousin drove long haul through Texas. He didn't laugh. He told me truckers had been whispering about that rest area for years. Some said they'd heard the same laughter in the middle of the night. A few swore they'd seen kids running between the tables, always barefoot, always staying just out of the light. No families, no vehicles, just laughter where there shouldn't be any. I told myself I'd never stop there again, but I can't shake it. Every time I pass Abilene now, I feel the urge to look for that rest stop, to see if the tables are still empty, if the lamps still buzz, if I'll hear that sound again. Part of me knows that if I ever did, I might not make it back to the car. And yet part of me listens for it anyway, waiting for that faint chorus of children playing tag in the dark, long after midnight, where no children should be. The Panhandle is a strange place to find yourself alone at night. A long stretch of highway that feels like it doesn't belong to the rest of Texas. Route 87 runs through miles of flat land, endless grass that rattles in the wind, and distant lights that never seem to get closer no matter how long you drive. I'd been hauling a refrigerated load southbound, somewhere past Dumas, maybe heading toward Amarillo. I can't even recall exactly anymore. It was close to midnight when the coffee I'd been pouring down my throat all evening caught up with. Me and I had to pull into one of those state rest stops. You've seen them if you've ever driven through that country. 2 long strips of pavement lined with sodium lamps humming like bugs frying on a grill, a squat brick building in the center with restrooms and vending machines, and the wind screaming across the open prairie loud enough to make the whole building moan. It was that kind of night. A steady panhandle wind howling so hard the stop's flagpole whipped like it was about to snap. I parked under a lamp, killed the engine, and climbed down. I remember how quiet the truck sounded after I shut it off, how the hum of the reefer unit seemed swallowed by the emptiness around me. There wasn't another vehicle in sight, just that little building glowing orange under the buzzing lamps. Inside it was no warmer, the air cold and echoing off the cinder block walls. I could smell the sharp sting of cleaning chemicals, maybe bleach, but underneath it was something damp and old, like water that had seeped in and never dried out. My boots echoed on the tile as I walked into the men's room. All the stalls were empty. I picked the last one on the end and closed the door. I slid the bolt across, tested it, and sat down, my body grateful to stop moving after 10 hours on the road. It started when the wind outside roared against the building again, rattling something loose in the ceiling. The stall door gave a little shake, just a quiver. I thought nothing of it, figured it was just the draft. Then, as I sat there, the door shook again, harder this time, like someone had grabbed it and given it a quick tug. I froze. My eyes went to the gap under the stall, waiting for the shadow of boots to fall across it. Nothing. Just the flicker of the fluorescent light, buzzing loud enough I could hear the ballast clicking. I leaned forward, listening. My heart had already started to climb into my throat, but I tried to tell myself it was the wind vibrating the door. The third rattle wasn't the wind. The door jolted, the bolt straining against the frame with a sharp metallic clink, as if someone had yanked it from the outside. I sat still, every hair standing up on my arms. I forced myself to look down again, and I swear to you there was no shadow, no boots. Nobody was there. My mouth went dry. I coughed, said something dumb like occupied just to break the silence, but the sound came out weak, not convincing even to myself. Then it happened. The bolt slid back. I didn't touch it. I was sitting there, my hands flat on my knees, and I watched the metal latch retract like an invisible hand had pulled it. The door creaked open half an inch, the fluorescent above popping faintly. That little gap felt like the mouth of hell opening, and my body locked up so hard I couldn't even breathe. My instinct was to slam it shut again, but some part of me was screaming that if I moved, if I acknowledged it, whatever was outside would come in. For a long moment, nothing happened. Just the sound of the wind shrieking through the vents and the faint drip-drip of a leaky faucet at the sink. I finally mustered enough nerve to shove the door closed with my boot, hard, and I forced the bolt back into place. My hands were trembling, so bad I could hardly push it across. I sat there waiting, every muscle wired tight. Then, soft as a sigh, something whispered on the other side of the door. I couldn't tell if it was words or just breath against the crack. But it was close, right at ear level. My skin crawled like fire ants under it. I almost screamed, but bit it back. I don't know how long I stayed like that, clutching the stall walls like they'd protect me. At last, the wind outside gusted again, and the lights flickered. In that flicker, I thought I saw a shape, a darkness darker than the shadows, standing in the empty space beneath the door. When the light steadied, it was gone. I couldn't take it anymore. I shoved the door open and burst out, pants half fastened, stumbling into the middle of the restroom. The place was empty. Every stall door hung open, every urinal gleamed under the buzzing lights. I splashed water on my face at the sink, my reflection pale and shaky in the scratched mirror. Behind me, the stall I'd left swung slowly open and shut, though there was no draft in that room. I backed out fast, keeping my eyes on it until I was outside under the orange lamps. My truck was the only thing there. I climbed in, locked the doors, and pulled back onto the highway as fast as I could shift gears. My heart was hammering like I'd run a mile. In the mirror, the rest stop shrank into the distance until it was nothing but a dark lump on the prairie. I kept driving for hours, afraid to stop again until daylight. To this day, I don't know what opened that door. I know what I saw, and what I didn't see. There wasn't anybody else in that restroom, but I can still hear that bolt sliding back, clean and certain, as if something wanted me to step out into the empty room and see what was waiting. And the worst part is, I think if I'd hesitated longer, if I'd actually opened the door myself, I might never have walked out of that place at all. I was driving down I-45 through Huntsville late one night, somewhere around 2 in the morning. The highway stretched thin and empty under the pale glow of the green exit signs. Truck lights were few, mostly big rigs humming steady with their red taillights glowing in the distance. I had been pushing myself for hours, stopping only once in Dallas for a quick cup of bad coffee, and by the time Huntsville's trees began closing in along the shoulders of the road, I felt the fatigue creeping hard. That's when I saw the sign for the rest area and decided I'd pull off for a few minutes, stretch my legs, maybe splash some water on my face before continuing south. The rest area was set back behind a line of pines, dimly lit by a few flickering sodium lamps that gave everything a jaundiced glow. As I pulled in, I noticed immediately how empty it was. Usually at least 1 or 2 cars sat parked near the vending machines, a truck or two idling near the far end. But this lot was silent. No engines, no headlights, no movement. Just my tires crunching the gravel as I rolled to a stop. I parked, near the middle, not too close to the darkened tree line, and as soon as I opened the door, the smell hit me. Heavy, thick smoke, the kind that seeps into your clothes after you've stood too long around a campfire. Only this wasn't pleasant. It was acrid, clinging, wrong somehow, like scorched plastic and charred wood. I froze, half expecting to see flames somewhere, maybe a trash can fire or a truck engine overheating. But the lot was empty. The building stood silent and the air was calm. I sniffed again and there was no mistaking it. The place reeked of fire. I walked toward the restrooms, my boots crunching over bits of broken glass scattered along the pavement, and the smell only grew thicker. As I neared the concrete building, I reached the door, put my hand on the handle, and hesitated. My eyes watered slightly from the phantom smoke, though the night air was still. I pushed inside and was met with the cool echo of the tiled room. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly, overhead a couple of them flickering in and out. No haze, no soot, not even a wisp of steam curling from the sinks. Yet the smell was strongest in there, overwhelming, as if someone had just put out a fire moments before. The stalls were empty, the mirrors smeared and dull, but there was no explanation for that burnt stench that coated my tongue like ash. I hurried through my business uneasy, and when I came back out into the night, the smell hadn't lessened. If anything, it seemed to hover thickest right there in the parking lot. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach clench. Along the far edge of the pavement, just before the tree line, were blackened shapes, faint and uneven, as though the ground itself bore the memory of flames. I walked closer, against my better judgment, and saw it wasn't fresh but old scorched patches etched into the asphalt in strange shapes. One area looked almost like the outline of a foundation, as though something larger than a trash fire had burned here once. My skin prickled. The lamps hummed faintly behind me, but I felt watched, like the trees themselves had eyes. I climbed back into my truck, shut the door, and tried to convince myself it was all in my head. Some old burn-off from nearby brush. Maybe the wind carried it in, though the night air was completely still. I started the engine and sat there idling, hands tight on the wheel. That's when I caught it in the rearview mirror. A shape. Not clear, not solid, but a flicker of movement across the lot. Something standing for only an instant, tall and thin, backlit by the glow of the lamps, before vanishing as if it had never been there. My heart hammered so hard I could feel it in my throat. I twisted in the seat to look, but the pavement was empty, only the stretch of dark trees staring back. I shifted into gear and pulled out fast, headlights sweeping across the lot as I left. As they did, the beams caught something at the edge of the building. It was faint, but I swear I saw char marks running up the side of the concrete wall, black streaks like smoke damage, though when I glanced back a second later they were gone, leaving the walls smooth and gray again. The smell lingered in my cab even as I sped back onto the interstate, strong enough to make me gag. I rolled the windows down, desperate for fresh air, but the burnt stench clung stubbornly to the fabric of the seats, to my jacket, even to my skin. I drove hard for another 30 miles before pulling into a truck stop to refuel and calm down. As I stood outside, the night was crisp, free of any smoke, and I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it all. That is, until the old man at the next pump saw me fanning my jacket and wrinkled his nose. "You been near fire?" he asked, his voice gravelly. I told him no, not that I knew of, just stopped at the rest area outside Huntsville. His expression changed, tightened. He gave a slow shake of his head. "That place burned near down back in the 70s. Whole family trapped inside the building. Folks say you can still smell it sometimes, like the fire never went out." I didn't sleep that night. Even when I made it to Houston hours later, the scent hadn't entirely faded. I showered twice, changed clothes, scrubbed my hands until they were raw, but every time I shut my eyes I could smell that smoke again, heavy and suffocating, as though I was still sitting in that empty lot waiting for something to appear from the shadows with its skin blackened and burning. I told myself it was only a story, the kind truckers pass down to spook each other on long drives, but deep down I knew what I'd smelled, and worse, I knew it had followed me. Out past Pecos, where the two-lane highways run straight as fence wire and the horizon looks like it was hammered flat by God himself, there's a lonely stop in the desert that folks only use when they have to. It isn't a truck plaza with bright lights or a cafe, just a squat concrete building with a pair of restrooms, a couple of vending machines that barely work, and a scattering of picnic tables sitting crooked in the gravel. Mesquite brush surrounds it in every direction, thorny and thick, growing low but dense enough that once you step a few yards off the pavement, you can't see more than a few feet in front of you. The desert wind always smells faintly of dust, sage, and something dry and metallic like old copper pipe. When I was younger, my uncle used to tell me stories about that place. He'd been a deputy in Pecos County back in the 70s, and he swore on his badge that strange lights would appear in the mesquite at night, always about an hour after sunset, always when someone was alone long enough to notice them. He said they were small, about the size of a baseball, pale white with a faint yellow tint like lantern light through dirty glass. But they didn't stay still. They drifted slow and aimless at first, like fireflies with nowhere to be, then crept closer if you gave them attention. He claimed they weren't headlights, weren't campfires, weren't anything that belonged to people. They'd been seen for generations, going back to the cattle trail days when cowboys swore at them from the saddle and prayed they wouldn't come too close. The locals just called them the mesquite lights. He warned me plain as day, never look too long at them, never talk about them when you're out there, and for the love of God, never ever walk toward them. For years I thought it was just another West Texas tale to scare kids like the Goat Man or the Black Dog. But last summer I found myself driving that stretch of highway late at night, and I pulled into that very stop to piss and stretch my legs. It was close to midnight, hotter than hell even then, the desert heat radiating back up from the asphalt. The place was dead quiet. I killed my engine, and the sudden silence was so complete it pressed on my eardrums. Even the crickets sounded far away. The moon was just a sliver, the stars sharp enough to cut, and the whole desert lay spread out black and silver under them. I stepped out, stretched, and noticed how the air had that still quality, the kind that makes you feel like the world is waiting for something. I did my business, got back to the car, and that's when I noticed a faint glow in the brush. At first I thought it was just the reflection of my headlights, but they were off. Then I figured maybe it was some camper's lantern, though I couldn't imagine anyone trying to camp in that heat and scrub. The light hovered low, maybe 2 feet off the ground, and it pulsed faintly like it was breathing. I stood frozen, watching it. After a moment, I realized there wasn't just one. A second light blinked to life a few yards away, then a third, deeper in the brush. They bobbed lazily, drifting back and forth between the mesquite trunks, but every time I blinked, they seemed closer. Not fast, not in a straight line, just closer, like the distance between us was shrinking without me noticing. I remembered my uncle's warning and forced myself to look away, heart hammering. I opened the car door, sat down quick and shut it harder than I meant to. I tried to convince myself they were nothing but tricks of the eyes, reflections off glass, ball lightning maybe. But my skin prickled in a way I couldn't explain, the way it does when someone stares at you from across a room. Against my better judgment, I looked again. The nearest orb had slid out of the brush entirely, hovering at the edge of the gravel like it was testing the boundary between the desert and the man-made. Its glow was weak but steady, the same color as old bones in moonlight. I could see it, shining faintly on the pebbles below, which meant it wasn't just in my head. I cranked the ignition, praying the car wouldn't hesitate. The engine roared to life and the lights scattered, not retreating exactly, but dissolving back into the dark as if they'd never been there. I floored it out of that lot, dust trailing behind me, and didn't slow down until I was back under the orange halo of the next town's streetlights. I told myself I'd just imagined it. Heat, exhaustion, the loneliness of the desert road playing tricks. But 2 weeks later, I ran into a ranch hand in a bar in Fort Stockton, and without me saying a word about my experience, he started talking about the mesquite lights. He said his grandfather had seen them, his father too, and once when he was 16, he'd seen them follow the truck he was riding in for almost a mile. He leaned in real close and told me that if you ever make the mistake of speaking to them, acknowledging them with more than a glance, they come closer and closer until they're right at your window, and if you open the door, they'll come inside. He didn't say what happened after that, only looked down into his beer like it wasn't worth putting words to. I didn't sleep right that night. The memory of those pale little suns floating between the mesquite stayed with me, the way they didn't cast enough light to be useful but enough to prove they were real. A few weeks later, I had to drive that road again. I swore I wouldn't stop this time, but life has a way of testing promises. The gas gauge dipped low and I knew I had to at least slow down at the stop, risk the vending machines, and hope for a working one. It was near midnight again, just as hot, just as still. I pulled in, engine idling, window cracked. The brush was silent, darker than ink. For a moment I thought maybe it had all been in my head. Then, faint and low, a pale orb blinked awake between the thorny branches, and another answered it. I left the car running, hands trembling on the wheel, and I said one word aloud before I could stop myself. No. Just that. Sharp, defiant. And I swear on everything I know, the closest. Orb twitched like it had heard me. Then it began to drift forward, slow and deliberate, closing the space between us one patient yard at a time. The others followed, like a pack scenting blood. I slammed the car in reverse and tore out of there, gravel flying, my pulse hammering in my ears. In the rear view, for a long, terrible moment, I saw them keeping pace along the roadside, bobbing like will-o'-the-wisps, until finally they winked out all at once, leaving nothing but darkness behind. I've never stopped at that. Desert pull-off again. I take the long way around now, wasting an extra hour if I have to. But I think about those lights more often than I'd like. I think about what would have happened if I hadn't looked away the first night, or if I'd lingered that second time, let them get right up to the glass. And I wonder how many people never made it out of that stop to tell their story. Highway 90 cuts across Texas like a scar, stretching wide and lonely from San Antonio to Del Rio, where the scrubland turns dry and the night feels like it goes on forever. I'd been driving that road since my 20s, hauling loads between Eagle Pass and Houston, Enough nights under the stars and truck stop neon to know when a story was just trucker talk and when it was something darker. This one started with chatter on the CB, little jokes and nervous laughs about a semi with no lights tailgating folks near Del Rio. Nobody wanted to say it outright, but I could hear the tension every time someone brought it up, like they were testing the waters before admitting they'd seen it too. A truck that came out of nowhere, stuck to your bumper no matter how fast you went, then vanished without ever passing you or dropping back. The first time I personally noticed it was late summer, somewhere past midnight. I'd pulled out of a rest area west of Uvalde, one of those empty ones with just a couple picnic tables, a bathroom, and the hum of a vending machine that probably hadn't been stocked in a month. I was dead tired, trying to keep my eyes open, with a burnt cup of coffee when I saw headlights in my mirrors. No big deal, I thought, another trucker. Only there weren't any lights. Just the black shape of a semi creeping up behind me, cab tall, trailer long. No reflection, no running lights, nothing but the silhouette against the road. It was close. Close enough I should have seen detail, but all I got was a vague darkness pressing up against the back of my rig. My speedometer hit 75, then 80. Still there. Closer. My heart hammered, and I kept flicking the high beams behind me to see if it was even real. But the road stayed swallowed up. I thought, maybe it was some lunatic running dark, a trucker with a death wish, or maybe Border Patrol running some kind of unmarked vehicle. But no matter how much I sped up or slowed down, it stayed right there, like it was tethered to me. Then, just as sudden as it had appeared, it wasn't there anymore. 1 second I was sweating bullets gripping the wheel. The next, the road behind. Me was bare and empty under the moon. I pulled over, heart racing, walked the length of my trailer with a flashlight. Nothing. Not even dust kicked up. I didn't tell anyone. You drive long enough, you see things you can't explain, and folks already think truckers tell tall tales. But then I heard it again. A buddy of mine out of San Angelo, Miguel, came on the CB 2 weeks later, voice shaking like I'd never heard it before. He said he'd been hauling cattle past Del Rio, clear skies, open stretch when he saw it too. Same deal. He thought it was some joker with his lights off. Except this time when he pulled into the Val Verde rest area to let it pass, nothing came by. He waited 10 minutes, stepped out for a smoke, swore he could still hear the low rumble of a diesel idling somewhere nearby. But the place was empty, just him and the desert. After that, I started paying attention. More and more drivers swapped the same story. Sometimes it was a sedan, sometimes a pickup, but mostly folks said it was a big, semi-silent except for the feeling in your gut when it came up behind you. Folks said you never saw a logo or color, just a hulking black nothing like it was cut from the night itself. A few swore the air turned cold in their cabs when it got close, like the AC kicked on full blast, even in the heat of August. One man, a rookie out of Laredo, claimed his radio went dead the moment the truck showed up, only to crackle back to life when it disappeared. He didn't last long after that, quit the road within the year. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was fatigue, the endless dark playing tricks on tired eyes. Maybe it was smugglers running lights off in stolen rigs. But the more I thought about it, the less it made sense. How could something follow so close without headlights and never once drift or slam into someone? How could it vanish without a trace when you stopped to let it pass? And why always near Del Rio, between those barren stretches where the mesquite brush creeps close and the sky feels too big? The night that cemented it for me came in October. I'd left a little rest area outside Del Rio around 2 in the morning, hauling south toward Bracketville. The moon was thin, the road almost too dark even with high beams on. 10 miles out, I felt it. The pressure, that gut-deep awareness of being followed. Glancing in the mirrors, I saw it again. The black semi, close enough I should have seen, the grill right up against my trailer, but all I got was a formless shadow. I tried the usual, braking, speeding, weaving, but it never moved. I kept my eyes forward, because the longer I looked in the mirror, the worse I felt. My chest tightened and every nerve in me screamed not to stop this time. I passed a pullout and forced myself to keep going. Then, without sound or sign, the weight lifted. When I finally dared to look, it was gone again. But something stayed with me. A smell. Faint but sharp. like burned rubber and diesel mixed with something sour. I checked my cab, my brakes, my trailer, but nothing was wrong. It was just in the air, clinging like an aftertaste. Later, I found out that stretch of Highway 90 had seen one of the worst wrecks in Texas trucking history back in the late 70s. A semi loaded with gasoline jackknifed and exploded, killing the driver and torching everything around him. Some folks said he'd been running without sleep, tailgating another rig in the dark, too tired to react in time. Others whispered it wasn't his first wreck, that he had a record of pushing limits, forcing smaller cars off the road. Either way, they said the fire burned so hot it melted the asphalt, and for years you could still see blackened patches when the sun hit just right. Now when the stories come up on the radio, nobody laughs anymore. They talk quieter, like the truck itself is listening. Some won't even stop on Highway 90 after dark, preferring to push through to San Antonio or Eagle Pass. I still run it sometimes because the job demands it, but I've learned to keep my eyes locked ahead. I don't brake, don't accelerate, don't acknowledge the shadow when it creeps up close. Because every driver who said they did, everyone who tried to get a good look or pulled over to wait it out, they swore they heard something else. A second set of tires squealing in their ears, the smell of burning fuel, and just before it vanished, the hiss of air brakes releasing right beside their cab, like the ghost of a wreck replaying itself in the endless Texas night. And once you've heard that sound, they say you'll never drive alone again. The hill country roads are quiet in the late hours, especially the ones that snake off Highway 281 and wind into ranch land where fences stretch for miles and the mesquite trees stand like crooked shadows against the sky. I was coming back from visiting my cousin in Careville, taking the FM roads because I hated the heavy traffic on the main highways. It was early spring, a cool night with the kind of damp wind that carried the smell of cedar and caliche dust. I had been driving for a long time, my headlights cutting tunnels of light through darkness that pressed in too close. When I saw the small roadside stop, a low cinder block building with peeling white paint, a few picnic tables, and a single street lamp buzzing with moths, I pulled over, more out of habit than need. I cut the engine, and the silence of the hill country filled the air. No cars, no coyotes, just the hum of that light. The place had the abandoned feel most rest stops do after midnight. The men's restroom door hung crooked, the metal frame streaked with rust. Across the little concrete lot, the women's restroom. Doctor was closed, though its chipped blue paint gleamed faintly under the yellow bulb. I walked toward the men's side, pushing the door open, and that was when I heard it. A voice faint and clear coming from the women's restroom. At first I thought it was the radio in someone's car left on, but it had that peculiar echo that only came from inside tiled walls. A woman was singing. The sound was thin, wavering, like it came from deep inside the building, but it carried in the still night. I froze by the men's door and listened. The voice was low, not young, not old either, but steady. It wasn't humming. It was singing words. "Come all ye fair and tender ladies." I knew the tune. A folk ballad. My grandmother used to hum it when she cooked, the kind of song passed down across kitchens and porches, worn smooth with time. The voice carried the first lines, soft but certain, and then stopped. It stopped right in the middle of the verse, cutting off as if the singer had forgotten the next line or had been interrupted. The silence that followed was heavier than before. I stood there waiting, but nothing came. I hurried into the men's room, relieved myself as quickly as I could, and the whole time my ears strained for sound, nothing but the drip of a faucet. When I stepped back out, I glanced again toward the women's door. Closed. No movement. No voice. I got into my truck and told myself I was tired, maybe hearing things. The FM roads can do that to you after long hours. I drove on, but the song clung to me like a burr in my mind. The second time it happened, it wasn't so easy to dismiss. A month later, I was driving back from Bandera, heading north. It was dusk when I pulled into the same rest stop. I remembered it immediately, the chipped paint, the crooked men's door. I almost didn't stop, but my bladder made the decision for me. When I stepped out, the world was alive with cicadas and the faint smell of rain still hanging in the cedar. I kept my eyes on the ground, not looking at the other side, but as I pushed open the men's restroom door, I heard it again. The voice, faint, from across the lot. "Come all ye fair and tender ladies." The same line, the same verse, the same pause as if she hit an invisible wall mid-song. I didn't move. The men's door was half open, my hand on it, and I stared at the women's side. The voice didn't pick up again. I felt the small hairs on my neck rise, the old warning your body gives before your mind catches up. I couldn't bring myself to go inside. I backed away, got into my truck, and sped off, the gravel spitting from under my tires. After that, I started asking around. Not directly, I didn't want people thinking I was spooked by ghost stories, but in bars, gas stations, I'd bring up the hill country rest stops, the ones on the FM roads. People talk if you listen long enough. Most just shrugged. A few said those old buildings had bad history. One old man outside of Blanco leaned close and told me, "You hear her too, don't you? The singing woman. She never finishes." He wouldn't say more, just tapped his temple like it was best not to carry her in your thoughts. By the third time, I was too far gone to ignore it. I stopped on purpose. It was late, close to midnight, the moon hanging pale and swollen over the hills. The lot was empty, the lone bulb buzzing. I walked straight to the women's door, my heart slamming so hard it hurt. I pressed my ear against the peeling wood. The song began. "Come all ye fair and tender ladies." The sound was right on the other side, as if someone stood inches away. The voice was calm, mournful, but steady. I waited. The pause came, sudden and sharp. I pushed the door open. The restroom was dark, only the faint moonlight filtering through a broken window. The smell was mildew and something else, sweet and spoiled like rotting flowers. The air was cold. My breath misted, though outside it was a warm night. Every stall was open, every corner empty. Then the singing started again. Not in front of me, now, but behind, from outside. I stumbled back, out the door, spinning in the lot. The song carried from the trees beyond the picnic tables, soft, weaving between the trunks. The same line, the same voice, always stopping at the same place. I don't remember driving away. I only remember the song still in my ears when I pulled into Johnson City, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. Since then, I've avoided that road, but I know she's there. Travelers mention it sometimes in whispers at gas stations, a woman's voice in the night singing a song that never ends. I've thought about why it always stops at that verse. My grandmother once told me that ballad was about girls being warned of false love, of betrayal and sorrow. Maybe she can't get past that part because that's where her life stopped. Maybe whoever she was, her story ended right there. And maybe it's not a song at all. Maybe it's an invitation unfinished, waiting for someone to answer, to sing the next line. I don't ever want to be the one who tries. East Texas summers never cool down. Not really. The heat sits on you like a wet towel, sticky and relentless, and the hum of cicadas in the trees makes you half crazy. I'd been driving I-20 eastbound for most of the day, the air conditioner, in my old Ford wheezing like an asthmatic dog, and by the time I pulled off near Tyler, I was half cooked. The rest area looked like any other, the kind of place you only stop because your body insists. Sodium lamps buzzed overhead, throwing their orange light on the cracked blacktop. A picnic area sat just off the lot, a few concrete benches arranged beneath a tangle of pines. I figured I'd stretch, maybe drink some cold water, let the sweat dry on my shirt before I pushed on toward Louisiana. It was dead quiet except for the constant drone of bugs and the occasional hum of a semi roaring. Passed on the interstate. The air was thick enough to chew. I carried my bottle over to one of the benches, sat down, and immediately froze. The concrete under me was cold. Not cool like shaded stone, but cold the way a bag of ice is cold when you press your hand against it. I lifted my palm and pressed it flat to the bench again just to make sure. The rest of me was cooking in 95 degrees of swampy Texas night, but that slab of concrete was cold as winter. I stood up fast, heart knocking around in my ribs, and looked over at the other benches. They sat there in the dark, identical, empty, all of them waiting. I touched one with the back of my hand and it was warm the way it should be. Only the one I'd sat on held the chill, like something buried in the earth was pushing its way through the stone. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe the bench had a crack in it. Maybe moisture seeped up from the ground, evaporative cooling, something science could explain. But when I sat back down, curiosity stronger than sense. The cold bit straight through my jeans and right into my skin. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't sitting alone. The night pressed heavier around me, and the pines whispered against each other, as if something moved among them. I stood, left the bench behind, and walked a slow circle, under the buzzing lamps. My water bottle sweated in my hand, and every time I looked back, that one bench stood out. The others faded into shadow, but that one glowed pale, as if the concrete itself had a film of frost clinging to it. I didn't last long. I got back in my truck and pushed on, telling myself I was overtired, heat-stroked, jumpy. But I kept thinking about it. The next week, when I told the story in a bar near Longview, an old man at the counter stopped me halfway through. Said he knew the place. Said nobody sat there twice. He leaned in close, whiskey on his breath, and told me about a girl, found there back in the late 70s, body stiff and blue, though the night was warm. Runaway, maybe. Maybe someone picked her up along the interstate and left her there. He swore the county boys kept it out of the papers because she wasn't local, but everybody in town heard the story. And after that, the bench never warmed up again. I didn't want to believe him, but the next time I passed that stretch of I-20, I stopped. Couldn't help myself. It was August, hotter than hell, and I walked straight to the picnic area. Sure enough, one bench waited colder than death. I pressed my hand to it and felt the kind of chill you feel standing in a meat locker. My breath fogged just faintly in the air, though the rest of the night smothered me with heat. And just for a moment, before I yanked my hand back, I felt fingers pressing against mine from beneath the stone, small and desperate, like someone trying to climb out. I stumbled back, water bottle hitting the ground, and when I looked again, the bench was empty, just a block of concrete under the pines. I never stopped there again. I don't even look that way when I pass by. But I swear, every time I drive that stretch east of Tyler on a summer night, the cab of my truck gets a little colder, and I can't help thinking about that runaway girl. Thinking maybe she's still there, waiting for someone dumb enough or unlucky enough to sit long enough for her to reach through. The first time I saw him was on a stretch of the Big Bend Highway, where the land yawns open and swallows the sky. Nothing but rock, sand, and the endless hush of desert wind. The kind of road where your gas gauge suddenly feels like a heartbeat you can't ignore, ticking down 1 mile at a time. I was headed south out of Alpine toward Study Butte, late afternoon in early spring. That dead hour when the heat hasn't yet softened, but the shadows are already starting to stretch like they've got secrets to tell. My tank was half full, my cooler empty, and the only sound in the car was the radio fizzing static because stations don't live out there. The road lived alone, a cracked vein running through the desert. That was when I saw him. He wasn't waving his arms or stumbling like some drunk drifter, just standing calm at the shoulder in dusty jeans and a sweat-stained shirt, his hand resting easy on the hood of an old Chevy sedan that looked like it hadn't rolled in decades. He didn't look desperate. That was the strangest thing. He just nodded as I slowed, polite, like he'd been expecting me. I rolled my window down halfway and he leaned slightly forward, keeping his distance, his face lean and sunburnt, the kind of face that looked carved out of the desert itself. He smiled in this slow, apologetic way. "Sorry to trouble you, I ran short on gas, just need a little to get into town." His voice was soft, measured, not begging, the kind of voice that makes you want to trust it. I told him I didn't have a can with me, but I'd seen a gas station about 20 miles back. I said I could circle around, grab a gallon or two, and bring it back. He thanked me with that same polite smile, eyes shaded under the brim of a hat so worn the sweat rings had turned the fabric dark. Nothing about him set off alarms. He looked like any man who'd underestimated how far the next station was. A mistake you make once before you learn the hard way. I told him I'd be back and he nodded once more, a gesture that felt final like a bow. When I hit the station, the sky was sliding into bruised purples, the desert cooling faster than my memory of him could. I filled a plastic can and grabbed a soda for myself, thinking about how long I'd been driving empty stretches of road without ever stopping for someone. Something about the way he spoke had made me want to help, like it was the least I could do. When I came back 20 minutes later, the desert had swallowed him whole. His car, the Chevy, the man himself, gone. Not just gone in the sense of maybe he got a ride. Gone in the sense that there wasn't a tire track in the dust, no scuff of boots on the roadside. Nothing. I parked anyway, got out, let the cooling wind hit my face. The can of gas was heavy in my hand. I walked the shoulder where I'd seen him leaning, but the earth was unmarked, like he'd been nothing more than a mirage the desert spat up. I stood there longer than I should have, heart tapping quicker than I wanted to admit. I kept thinking I'd missed some sign. Maybe he'd rolled the car behind a ridge. Maybe he'd cut across into the scrub. But the land stretched in every direction, flat and open. No place to hide a sedan, no way to erase the tracks. A truck passed eventually, lights carving into the twilight, and the driver gave me a look like I was the crazy one, standing there, with a red can of gas and no car in sight. I left it on the dirt shoulder anyway, thinking maybe if I drove off he'd come back for it. Or maybe I just didn't want to carry it home, like it belonged to him now. That night I checked into a motel in Terlingua, one of those roadside places with a flickering neon vacancy sign and walls thin enough to hear the next guy cough. Sleep didn't come easy. Every time I drifted off, I saw his face leaning into the window, that smile too calm, too knowing. I told myself I was being ridiculous, just a man in need, gone by the time I returned. But then I overheard the desk clerk talking the next morning when I was checking out. A couple from Houston had come in after me, whispering about some guy they'd seen by the roadside asking for gas. They swore he vanished when they turned back. The clerk just nodded, said folks had been seeing him for years, said he was an old ranch hand who burned alive in his car one summer in the 70s when his tank caught fire, way out past the bend. They said he still asked for gas, polite as you please, before slipping back into the desert. I didn't tell them I'd talked to him, didn't tell them about the weight of the can in my hand, the way his eyes had never blinked in the fading light. I just drove out into the desert again, radio buzzing empty, wondering if somewhere behind me that Chevy sat smoldering forever at the side of the road, and if the man in dusty clothes was still standing there waiting, patient, for the next fool kind enough to stop. I was driving back up I-45 late one night, somewhere between Houston and Dallas, when I decided to pull over at one of those rest stops tucked back from the road. You know the kind, dim sodium lights buzzing overhead, a few vending machines, glowing like little altars in the dark, and that low hum of 18-wheelers pushing past out on the interstate. I wasn't tired exactly, but I needed to stretch my legs, clear my head, and hit the restroom before the last push home. The air was heavy that night, sticky the way Texas gets after a storm. The lot was mostly empty, just a single pickup parked crooked near the trees, and an old Buick that looked abandoned. The picnic tables out front were wet from earlier rain, glistening under the yellow lights. I remember pausing before going inside, hearing nothing but cicadas and the steady swoosh of cars far off. The building looked like every other rest stop, that bland state-issue brick with the state seal near the door. But when I stepped inside, the smell hit me first. That faint tang of bleach mixed with something sour, like old mop water that never quite dries. The men's room was down one side, women's down the other. A vending area in between. The place was so quiet that my own footsteps echoed. That's when I heard it. A baby crying. At first I thought maybe I was imagining it, a trick of acoustics, or the whine of plumbing. But no. It was distinct, high-pitched, raw, the kind of crying that claws at you, makes your chest tighten even if you've never had kids of your own. It was coming from the women's restroom. I froze in that hallway, caught between embarrassment and instinct. It was close to midnight, and the lot was empty. Who would be in there with a baby at this hour? The crying wavered, like whoever it was couldn't catch their breath. I called out, just a tentative hello. The sound cut off. The silence that followed was worse than the crying. My scalp prickled. I waited, heart thumping, expecting to hear footsteps or a door unlatch, but nothing came. After a few seconds, the crying started again, softer this time, more muffled, like it was tucked away in the tiled corners of that room. I told myself maybe a young mother had pulled off the road, overwhelmed, trying to calm her child. That made sense. But the longer I stood there, the more wrong it felt. There had been no shuffle of movement, no low murmur of a parent soothing, just that lonely wail, mechanical in the way it started and stopped like a recording set on a loop. I pushed open the door to the women's side, just a crack. I expected someone to shout at me, to find myself face to face with an exhausted woman and a red-faced infant. Instead, I was greeted by fluorescent light buzzing overhead, the row of stalls and the long mirror above the sinks. Empty. The crying didn't echo from a stall or a corner. It seemed to seep straight out of the tiled walls. I stepped inside, half out of curiosity, half because something in me needed to know. The crying swelled again, bouncing off the ceiling. I moved stall to stall, shoving each door open. Empty. No diaper bag, no stroller, no signs of life. My reflection looked strained in the mirror, pale and damp with sweat, eyes darting as though I might see someone standing behind me. But there was nothing. I leaned down by the sinks, pressed my ear against the cold tile. The sound seemed louder there, vibrating in my bones, like it was coming from inside the wall itself. The baby's voice cracked mid-cry, the way recordings do when they glitch. Then it stopped again, cutting off clean, no fading, no hiccuping breaths. My throat went dry. I backed out slowly, refusing to turn my back on the stalls until I hit the hallway. The crying started again, faint this time, as though it was drifting further away, being pulled down some hidden corridor. I left. I didn't even use the restroom. Outside, the night air felt like freedom, though it was thick and hot. I glanced around the lot again. The pickup was gone. The Buick still sat crooked, its windows fogged over. No one else was around. I got into my car, slammed the locks down, and just sat there, hands shaking on the wheel. The crying echoed faintly in my ears like I'd carried it out with me. I should have driven off right then, but curiosity gnawed at me. I grabbed my phone and pulled up a search, thinking maybe this wasn't the first time someone heard something weird there. And I found it. Not one story, but several, spread across years. Travelers reporting the same thing, a baby crying in the women's restroom, especially at night. Police called out more than once. Each time, nothing found. No baby, no recording equipment, nothing. Some said the building had been rebuilt after a fire decades ago. Others swore a woman and her infant had been killed on that stretch of road in the 70s. Details blurred with retellings, but the core was the same. People heard what they weren't supposed to, something trapped in the walls of that place. I finally drove off, headlights cutting through the dark, and I didn't look back until I hit the next gas station 30 miles up. But even there, in the harsh fluorescent wash, I swore I still heard it faintly when I closed my eyes. That same thin cry echoing out of tile and concrete, begging to be found. And here's the part that keeps me up. On my phone, in the voice memos app, there's a file I didn't record. It appeared the morning after. The timestamp matches the exact hour I was standing in that hallway. When I play it, all you hear is static and then, clear as anything, a baby crying. It was one of those hot panhandle evenings when the daylight lingers too long, as though the sun itself can't bear to leave the empty flatlands around Amarillo. I'd been driving I-40 for hours, chasing the horizon through wheat fields and grain silos, and the weariness had started to bleed into something else, a kind of nervous edge that makes the road feel endless. When I pulled into the rest stop west of town, the light was thinning but hadn't yet given way to night. The wind smelled faintly of dust and hay, and a couple of moths already batted at the humming fluorescent bulbs under the shelter by the vending machines. There was only one other vehicle in the lot, a beat-up silver Buick with Oklahoma plates, sitting cockeyed in a space like its driver hadn't cared much for lining up. I didn't see anyone around it, though. The air was still hot, still sticking to my skin, but I got out and stretched, listening to the whisper of cars tearing past on the highway. I was bent over the cooler in my back seat, digging for a cold bottle of water when I heard the footsteps. Slow and deliberate, crunching gravel coming from the far side of the lot. I turned and saw him, an older man, tall but a little stooped, wearing jeans that looked stiff with dust and a faded button-up shirt tucked tight into his waistband. He had on a wide-brimmed felt hat, the kind you don't see much anymore outside, of feed stores or old photographs. His boots made a dry, shuffling noise as he approached. There wasn't anything immediately threatening about him, but something felt wrong all the same, like he hadn't quite stepped out of the right decade. His face was mostly in shadow from the hat, though I caught a pale glint of his eyes. "Excuse me," he said, voice scratchy but polite. "Could you tell me the time?" It was such a simple request that my first instinct was to laugh. He could have looked at the vending machines where the digital clock glowed bright red, or he could have had a phone like everyone else. Still, I pulled mine out of my pocket. The screen lit up. 8:14 p.m. I glanced up to tell him, but he was gone. Not walking away, not stepping aside. Just gone, as though he'd never been standing there in the first place. The gravel was empty. The air felt heavier suddenly, the kind of weight that comes before a storm. I froze, my throat dry, staring across the lot. The Buick sat exactly where it had before, the Oklahoma plate reflecting a dull gleam of sunset. I didn't hear footsteps retreating, didn't see a figure ducking behind the shelter or walking toward the road. My pulse hammered against my neck as I spun, phone still in my hand, scanning every angle. He wasn't there. He wasn't anywhere. I shoved my phone back into my pocket, got in my car, and locked the doors. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I told myself I was tired, that maybe he'd moved faster than I thought, slipped behind the vending machines or the restroom building. But there was no sound, no sign of movement. I watched the shelter for what felt like 10 minutes, eyes burning, until I forced myself to pull back on the highway. I didn't tell anyone at first, not until a few weeks later at a bar in Amarillo, when I overheard two truckers talking about the westbound rest stop. One of them, a big man with grease under his fingernails, said, "You ever see that fella in the old hat? Comes up real polite, asks the time, and the second you check, he ain't there?" The other one nodded, his expression flat. "Happened to me last winter. Don't stop there anymore." I butted in before I could stop myself, asking what they meant, and the stories tumbled out. Different people, different nights, but always the same. A man in dusty clothes, wide-brimmed hat, asking for the time, vanishing the moment you look away. They said he'd been seen there for years, maybe decades. Some thought he was a drifter who got robbed and dumped in the fields back when the rest stop was built. Others swore he was a ranch hand who died in a rollover when his truck flipped on black ice in the 70s. No one knew. But everyone agreed you never wanted to meet him twice. There were whispers, never proven, but told like warnings, that a few people who did went missing. Their cars left empty at the rest stop until a wrecker hauled them away. Like they'd stepped out to check the time and never stepped back. I tried to laugh it off, though my gut twisted the whole time. You hear stories like that in bars, stories greased with beer and imagination. But the truth was I'd seen him myself, heard him, felt the shadow of his presence as surely as the grit of dust in my teeth. It clung to me even when I left Amarillo, even when I told myself it was nothing but a trick of fatigue and the long road. Months later, on a different trip, I passed that same rest stop around midnight. The lot was empty, the lights buzzing pale against the dark plains, and without meaning, too, I slowed. My headlights swept across the picnic tables, the vending shelter, the bathroom standing square and silent. For just an instant, I thought I saw him again. A thin figure standing under the lamplight with his hat pulled low. My chest seized, and I pressed harder on the gas, eyes fixed straight ahead, until the rest stop was a receding glow in my rearview mirror. I didn't check the clock on my dash. I didn't dare. Because I knew if I looked down even for a second and then raised my eyes again, the passenger seat beside me might not be empty anymore. I drove that stretch of I-35 more times than I can count, Austin to San Antonio and back again, and if you've ever run that corridor, you know the rhythm of it. Long ribbons of highway hemmed in by fields that turn to subdivisions, then strip malls, then stretches of nothing but cedar and live oak. Rest stops pepper the way, little concrete oases with buzzing lights, vending machines that smell like burnt coffee, and bathrooms that look like they were already old when they opened. I had a routine: fill up in Austin, make the drive, and, if I needed to stretch or take a leak, I'd pull off at the same rest area near New Braunfels. I never thought much about the graffiti on those bathroom walls. Everyone knows those places are covered in it: crude drawings, phone numbers, ugly slurs, declarations of undying love from one bored kid to another. It's like wallpaper in there, background noise you stop seeing after a while. The first night, I noticed something different. I was on my way back from a late job in San Antonio. The rest area was nearly empty. Just one semi idling out front and a beat-up sedan parked crooked near the picnic tables. The air smelled faintly of diesel and cut grass. I went into the men's room, the lights humming overhead, and while I stood there, I found myself staring at the writing on the wall in front of me. Not unusual, except this time it was. The words didn't look like the usual scrawls. They looked newer, sharp, fresh. Someone had written Highmark in thick black marker across the chipped tile. My name isn't rare, but something about the way it was written made me freeze. It was the same blocky letters I used to draw in middle school when I'd carve my name into notebooks. I shook it off. People write all kinds of crap. Maybe it wasn't meant for me. I finished up, washed my hands, and left, trying not to think about it. But on the drive north, I kept glancing in the rear view, the dark highway stretching behind me, and the thought nagged. Who the hell writes a name like that in a random bathroom? Who writes it the way I used to? A week later, I was headed down, again late afternoon this time, and when I stopped at that same place, I checked the wall without meaning to. The Highmark was gone. Not scrubbed off, not painted over, just gone. In its place were other words, thin and cramped, like a dozen. Voices had been speaking at once through a Sharpie. I leaned closer and made out pieces. Leave it and not safe, and he knows. Beneath it, in fresh red marker, mark don't look. My stomach dropped. My name again. The red ink looked wet, though when I touched it with the edge of my finger, it was dry. I didn't stay long. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those words. It felt like something had followed me out of that bathroom, clinging like the stink of ammonia and old piss. I tried to tell myself it was a coincidence. Names are common, messages overlap. But then the dream started. I'd see the bathroom wall stretching taller and taller, covered in black ink, letters peeling themselves free and sliding around like ants. They'd form words in front of me. Always my name. Always something I wasn't supposed to know yet. By the third visit, I was too curious to avoid the place. Curiosity is poison, but I couldn't help it. The stall was empty when I stepped inside, and sure enough, the graffiti was different again. The older tags were still there, but rearranged, shuffled like a deck of cards dealt by someone with shaking hands. Whole sentences twisted across the wall, jagged but legible if you looked long enough. Marky waits behind. I spun so fast I nearly slipped. The bathroom was empty. Just buzzing lights, dripping pipes, and the faint smell of mildew. I left fast that time, but the road didn't feel empty. Every set of headlights that came up behind me lingered too long. Every shadow in the cedar trees bent the wrong way. When I got home, I swore off that stop. For a while, I kept my word, but it didn't matter. The words followed. The next time I stopped at a gas station outside Buddha, I saw it again, this time on the stall door. You can't run. In black marker, same block letters. By the next week, it was scrawled on the mirror at a Valero. Then, horrifyingly, on the side of a urinal in a Buc-ee's, something about the sheer normalcy of that place made it worse. I wasn't safe anywhere along the corridor. I didn't tell anyone. How do you explain that the graffiti is talking to you? That it knows your name? That it moves? The words grew more specific. They didn't just say my name anymore. They told me things. At first mundane, details about my day that nobody else could have known. Then darker. Check the trunk. That one I ignored until the smell forced me to look. A dead raccoon had crawled up into the back of my car, rotting in the heat. Slow down or you die. I slammed the brakes seconds before a jackknife semi came barreling across the median outside San Marcos. That one saved me. But the cost was knowing I was being watched, tracked, played with. The worst was the night it changed while I watched. I was in the rest stop again, the same one I had promised never to visit. My nerves were shot from too much caffeine, too many miles. I stared at the stall wall, daring it to move. For a long minute, nothing happened. Just the stale air and my own ragged breathing. Then, as if some unseen hand were pressing beneath the surface of the tile, the letters began to shiver. Black. Marker bled sideways, words tearing themselves apart, reforming, spelling new things. I stumbled back against the sink, unable to blink. It wrote, "Turn around." I didn't. I ran. That should have been the end, but the walls don't let go. I've stopped driving that corridor. I take back roads now. Long, winding routes that eat up twice the time, but even there, the words find me. Scratched into the paint of an old gas pump. Carved into the wood of a picnic table at a state park. Scrawled on the inside of a porta potty, outside a construction site. My name, my warnings, my doom spelled out like graffiti knows more about me than I do. The last time I saw it was a week ago. I was at a diner off a farm road, nowhere near the interstate. I went to wash my hands before paying the check, and there it was on the mirror, drawn in soap with a finger. Mark, this is the last one. I don't know what it means, I don't know when it comes. But every time I see a wall now, blank or otherwise, I can't look away. I wait for the words to rearrange. I wait for my name. And I'm terrified of the day it spells something final. The stretch of highway south of Laredo has always carried a kind of silence you don't find anywhere else in Texas. It isn't the kind of quiet you get in the hill country or along the panhandle plains where the wind makes its own music across the grass. No, this quiet feels heavy, like the air itself is pressing down on you, stifling, the kind of silence that makes you check your mirrors twice and roll down the window just to hear something familiar. People who haven't driven those border routes at night don't understand how empty it really feels. Mile after mile of mesquite and thorn scrub, border patrol checkpoints, the occasional set of glowing eyes from some animal slipping back into the brush, and nothing else. The road feels endless, and when you stop at one of those scattered rest areas, it's worse. The buildings are lit, but the parking lots stretch out into blackness and there's never another car around when you want one to be. It started with travelers calling in strange reports. Most of them brushed off at first. A few people said they'd seen a green light hanging over the road when they pulled back onto Highway 83, drifting along behind them like it was tied to the bumper. Most of the time they said it blinked out after a few miles. A couple swore it followed them all the way to Zapata before vanishing as they passed the city limits. Nobody really took it seriously until a deputy sheriff named Alvarez caught sight of it himself. He was on night patrol, parked at one of the pull-offs near the river, sipping coffee and half asleep, when a sedan blew past with something glowing behind it. He thought at first it was a motorcycle running without its headlamp, just a sick green glow, but it moved wrong. It didn't bounce like a taillight, didn't flare or dim. It was steady, unnatural, floating maybe 10 feet off the pavement, and when he started his cruiser and pulled out after them, the thing veered off and locked onto him instead. Alvarez had his dash cam rolling. He hit the lights and gave chase, though he couldn't say why. It wasn't a car and it wasn't a person, but there's a certain reflex in law enforcement when something strange shows up on your road. You put it in your sights and you don't let go. He said it didn't matter how fast he pushed the crown. Vic? The glow kept pace, drifting back and forth like it was circling him, sometimes sliding ahead, sometimes hanging just over his rear windshield. The radio crackled, then died completely, and when he reached for the mic, it was dead in his hand. He was shouting, but no one heard him. He swore the dash cam went black the moment the glow surged closer. The cruiser lit up inside like he'd driven into a sea of phosphorescent water. The world outside drowned in a pale green wash that erased the lines of the road. His heart hammered. He couldn't see. But the wheel was still in his hands, the tires still thrumming. He braked hard, skidded, nearly went into the ditch, and just like that it was gone. The silence that followed felt worse than the glow. When the department pulled the footage the next morning, the entire pursuit was missing. You could hear the engine, the tires, even Alvarez's voice shouting. But the screen cut to black at the exact moment he described the light rising over the hood. It stayed black for nearly 4 minutes before returning, showing only his cruiser parked sideways, on the highway shoulder. The official explanation was a hardware failure. Alvarez took leave not long after. He drank heavy, they said, and never would talk about it again except once to a friend who told the story in hushed tones at a diner off 59. He said the deputy whispered that the glow wasn't outside the car at all near the end. It was inside, right there in the cab with him, crawling across the dash like liquid fire. Other travelers kept calling it in. A trucker headed north out of Roma said it followed his rig for 40 miles, casting shadows inside the sleeper as if someone walked around with a lantern. A family swore it slipped through their van windows like fog, leaving the kids screaming and clawing at their seats. An older woman on her way to Eagle Pass claimed she blacked out when it washed over her windshield and came to parked perfectly straight in the middle of the lane, hazards on, no memory of stopping. People started avoiding that rest stop south of Laredo, the one with the cracked vending machines and the bathrooms that reeked of mildew. Even Border Patrol agents, usually the ones with no patience for ghost stories, made excuses not to stop there. They'd say the coffee was bad or the lot was too dark, but it was more than that. A few admitted that whenever they pulled in, the sodium lights above the lot hummed and then flickered out, leaving them with nothing but the greenish glow of their own headlights and the sense that something else was just beyond the tree line. There was one more report that made its way into local whispers. A pair of deputies were called to check on an abandoned car sitting just north of Rio Grande City, hazards flashing in the dark. They found the doors open, keys still in the ignition, no driver, no passengers. The ground around it was damp as if a storm had passed, though the sky was dry and clear. When they leaned into the car, both men swore the dash smelled like copper, sharp and metallic, and faint streaks of something glowing pale green lingered on the upholstery. They pulled back quick, but one deputy touched it by mistake. He said his hand burned cold for days afterward, and the skin peeled as if frostbitten. After that, the stories quieted down, but only because people stopped filing them. Folks along those roads know when to keep their mouths shut. The glow still shows up, sometimes to ranch hands riding home late, sometimes to truckers who swear they'll never take that route again. It's always the same pale green, always just a little too close, and always vanishing right when you try to prove it. No one has a picture, no one has clean footage, and no one who's seen it twice seems willing to drive alone at night anymore. There's a weight on that stretch of highway, and if you ever find yourself leaving that rest stop after dark, you'll feel it. The mirrors catch things that shouldn't be there. The silence settles deeper than you thought possible. And if a glow rises behind you, don't speed up, don't look for help, and don't think your phone or your dash cam will save you. The last thing you'll see is green, and then nothing at all. I took the job because night work steadied me. That was what I told friends who bothered to ask why a man in his 40s would swap a mechanic's bay for a mop and a ring of keys at a rest stop off I-45. Truth was, I had learned to like the hours when most people were asleep. The highway changed after midnight. The hiss of tires over concrete felt like someone whispering a secret you could almost catch if you leaned in. The air got colder even in June, and the cicadas in the scattered mesquite sounded sharper, as if they had discovered you personally and were filing complaints. People lost their edges at night too. They came in with hats dipped low or with a soft look that could slide to mean if the wrong song came on or the coffee tasted burnt. You saw a little more of what folks were made of. The rest stop sat southbound, near Corsicana, just past the sign for the bakery and the next 40 miles of billboards promising pecan pralines and clean bathrooms. A cluster of low buildings with a long roof, vending machines humming like polite insects, picnic tables under floodlights that attracted every flying thing between Dallas and Houston. There were the women's and men's rooms with long banks of tile and stainless fixtures you could shave in if you were brave. And then a central lobby with travel brochures, a vending corner, a corkboard with lost dogs and church breakfasts on paper whose corners had curled from the humidity. Over the lobby doors hung the clock. It was a round, basic thing with black numbers and big hands, the kind that communicates authority without trying. It had the Texas outline printed faintly in the middle like a water stain, and the words, property. Of the state very small beneath 12. We'd had 3 of them since I started. The first had stopped at 2:13 a.m. on a Wednesday in March. I remembered because a state trooper was standing under it, counting out change for a Dr. Pepper when he said, real casual, that the clock had gone lazy, and when I went to tap it with my knuckle, I noticed how quiet the lobby had gone. The vending machines still hummed, but the sound had moved away, like you hear a generator in the next field. I tapped the glass. The second hand trembled and then didn't. The trooper laughed and said it would be my fault when he missed his report, then went out to the parking lot where his cruiser threw blue and white shapes over the asphalt. We replaced that clock the next day. I was there when Tony from the district office brought the new one in its crinkly plastic bag. He joked about bad batteries and bad luck and climbed the ladder with a new anchor kit because the hole in the cinder block had gotten wallowed out from years of screws. He set the time by his phone. That night, I swept and mopped and checked the paper towels and leaned my shoulder to the door of the women's room that always wanted to stick. And when the hummingbird hour rolled over and my watch said 2:14, I looked up and saw the new clock fixed at 2:13. The lobby had gone thin, again like someone had opened a door to weather that wasn't there. I could feel the cool even through the mop handle. It wasn't a cool breeze. It was the kind of cool you get in old deep freeze units when the rubber seals are still good. It smelled like aluminum and faint bleach and a whisper of something burned long ago. I thought about the trooper and his joke and watched the minute hand refuse to move, and I decided not to say anything to Tony because we had the third clock in the storeroom already, and I didn't want him to feel blamed. I kept the hour in my pocket and tried to work around it. The third clock went up a week later after the second froze for the 4th time. The women who ran day shift complained that travelers were asking them the time like it was the 1970s, and the supervisor got spooked and called maintenance even though the batteries were fine. The district office sent a memo that someone in Austin had flagged an odd pattern. They liked those words, odd pattern. I was the only one who worked through the hour when it happened. I could have explained more, but I didn't. There are some things that won't sit still on paper. No one but me seemed to notice the other changes. You stand in the lobby enough nights and you learn the rhythm of insects and travelers and trucks with air brakes that gasp like old men. At 2:13 now, everything pressed thin. I can't explain it any better than that. The space flattened the way heat does on a road in August when you see a mirage and think water. But here it was sound and air getting pressed. The drink in your hand tasted a little watered down. The shadow under the brochure rack puddled different, a bit too dark, like the floodlight outside had shifted 1 degree. Once I watched a moth that had been bouncing at the glass decide to stop in the middle of a wing beat and hang there with all the tragic dignity of a broken ornament until the second hand should have clicked to 14 and then the moth finished. The rest of its beat like nothing had happened. I used to fix my gaze on the clock and then drop it and see if I could catch that thinness somewhere else. I could smell it in the towels. I could feel it in the mop water. It made my fingertips feel smooth and dry as if I'd been rubbing them on chalk. Afterward, everything returned to normal in the same shrugging way humidity returns after a brief gust of cold rain. If you want to know whether I told anyone, I did. I told my ex-wife on the phone one morning, and she said I needed to see a doctor because lack of sleep makes people think the edges of life are moving. I told a cashier at the truck stop closer to town over eggs at 4 in the morning, and he laughed and said, "Clocks stop every day," and that I ought to consider a church instead of a clinic. He pulled his phone out to show me a picture of a clock in his mother's kitchen that had stopped at 3:33, and I nodded and said that was certainly something. I told myself it was the building settling or the air conditioning cycling or a capacitor, going in the digital eye that sets the timeline in layer after layer of cheap electronics. You tell yourself anything to wrap your mind around a thing and make it normal enough to sweep around. Then there was the boy on the bicycle. We got the heat early that year and the days came up hard and white. I was stepping out back by the supply, shade to smoke a cigarette I didn't need when I saw a boy with a pale face and an orange hoodie wheel a bicycle with a crooked handlebar across the edge of the lot. He looked around the way a kid looks when he wants to be seen. He stopped at the cooler where we kept the pet water and the bowl for strays, set the kickstand, and went inside carrying his front wheel like a trophy. I had the sense you get when a pop song you forgot plays in the produce aisle. I didn't think about him after that until 2:13, when I was restocking the travel brochures because the fall festivals were months away and the pages for splash parks were finally thinning out. The lobby went thin, and I looked up and saw the boy standing under the clock looking as if his scalp had been dusted with flour. His hair was wet and slicked back like he had stuck his head under a faucet. The orange hoodie clung heavy as a soaked towel. He looked at me. He didn't ask for a towel. He didn't shiver even though I could see water gather at the laces of his sneakers and leak out one drop at a time. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say help, or like he wanted to say, I am late. And then the second hand that wasn't moving didn't move. The thinness pressed harder, and I smelled the cold. The faint burn smell underneath it. The boy lifted his chin 1 inch the way a person does when he'll ask in the next second, and then he wasn't there. The floor had a small wet patch that smeared under my shoe when I stepped forward. It left a dark arc on the tile, and if you looked closely you could see grit in it, black specks like the body of a moth. I cleaned the water. I didn't mention it on my end of shift notes. It can be a private joy to keep a fragment of the strange to yourself when your life otherwise goes in straight lines. I told myself it was a man's way of protecting his nerves. That lasted until I saw the truck. It was 2 a.m. on a Saturday. Sometimes, very late, you get the human run of the place. You hear every faraway engine note. You hear the crossing trains sing even when it is miles out, the way a tuning fork sings after the musicians moved on. I was emptying the trash right by the exit door, and I had the sense of something existing in a pocket outside of the rest stop, just off the access road where the grass grows taller and leans with the jets of wind off passing semis. A set of headlights moved in slow with that weird smoothness that belongs to heavy things. The semi was a white reefer with a lopsided grill and one running light out, the kind that hauls produce or frozen meats. I could tell by the sound that his diesel wasn't right. The idle had a scatter to it that used to make my shoulders itch, with the urge to pop a hood. He rolled up to the far end of the lot and idled there. The cab lights were dark. The temperature unit on the trailer throbbed with its own small heartbeat. The minute hand on the clock sat down on the 13. The lobby, air drew tight. The vending machines suddenly made twice the noise. The reefer unit throbbed. I watched the cab door because you expect a man to step out and look over at you, nod, and start the slow work of his routine. The door didn't open. Something moved. Not a person. The trailer skin shifted like a muscle flinched under fur. If you've ever seen a big dog dream so hard that its ribs twitch, you know the movement. It swelled and settled once. Then the door on the other side of the cab opened and closed without anyone crossing the front. I put the bag of trash down and told myself to go inside and mind the lobby, because your life gets easier when you stay where you belong. I took one step, and the reefer unit coughed, and then found a smoother rhythm, and an awful cold gathered in the lobby and around me at the same time. I could feel the cold on my teeth as if I'd bitten a wad of tinfoil. I picked up the trash again and carried it toward the dumpster just to do anything, and when I came back around, the truck was gone. A state trooper came in 5 minutes, after the hour with the kinks ironed out of his face. He looked like the kind of man who jogs the perimeter of the county for fun. He poured coffee and said he would be back through after checking on a single-car incident up toward Rice. I asked him if a reefer had come through his way. He shrugged and told a story about working a wreck near Navarro Mills Lake in August, where the cargo thawed as he rode it up, and the smell turned the night into a bad joke. He paid for the coffee and went into the darkness without looking back, up at the clock. I wiped the counter where his paper cup had left a ring and wanted to ask him to wait with me another minute. I could not explain why. After that, I stopped avoiding the hour. I began looking for it. That's not a safe habit, but people adopt worse ones. I noticed other small things. At 2:13 a.m., a woman's voice once came soft through the speaker in the ceiling that plays the recorded welcome announcements about safety and litter. It said my name the way my grandmother used to say it, with an extra syllable in the middle. At 2:13 a.m., a pair of taillights backing away from the exit ramp drew a red smear along the lobby floor, and the smear remained as a line the width of my littlest finger until the second hand should have moved. At 2:13 a.m., the cinder block near the clock sweated darker than the block around it, and when I touched it, it was colder than anything should be in June in Texas. Once I pressed my ear to the wall, because a part of me had become a child again, and I heard a grinding noise that could have been tires scraping cement, and underneath it something like breath. The third clock failed in July. That night, the supervisor ordered us to leave the space blank to see if the air would forget. It did not. Even with the bare eyelets in a circle of unpainted block where the clock had hung like a pale ring on a finger, the hour came and pressed flat. That made the lobby feel less like a government building and more like a mouth. We went, a week without a clock, which turned ordinary acts of life into questions. People asked what time it was. They asked if the bathrooms were open. They asked if we had seen a boy on a bicycle. 3 different people used almost the same words. Near the end of that week, a man came off the highway wearing a neon safety vest and the hollow look of someone on his last hour of sobriety. He asked if anyone had turned in a brown wallet. There was no one else in the lobby. We looked through the lost and found bin and found a kid's wallet with a superhero on it. The man stared at it as if it hurt his eyes. He wasn't seeing it. He was seeing something through it. He said his brother had died on that stretch of road 5 years ago at about 2 in the morning when his reefer slid and kissed the concrete barrier harder than it should have. He said they always joked about the time because of the 13. He said there had been a boy, too, riding along the frontage road where his brother lost it, but no one could find him after. He put his hand on the counter as if the wood could steady his heart. He asked me the time. I looked at my watch. It was 2:12. I said it was 1:15 because it felt kinder. After he left, I stood at the lobby door and watched the raindrops skate under the light like minnows. The air smelled like hot tires and faraway lightning. I thought about the boy. All day I had been telling myself the boy was ordinary because it makes a thing ordinary when you say it often enough. But that night, I had the sense that ordinary had been stripped away from him like wet clothes. I went into the storage room and found the 4th clock in the same plastic bag we kept all of them in. I didn't want to be the one to put it up. I also didn't want to wait for Tony. I set the time by my phone and climbed the ladder. I drilled new anchors because the old holes were wallowed. I hung the clock, and when I took my hand off, the second hand jumped and started to tick. The space felt better with a clock. It made a human promise about order. I stood there with the drill still in my hand and waited. I have made worse decisions. The minute came, and the thinness settled in with something else moving along with it, a colder thread braided through a rope. I smelled that low-burned odor like old wiring. I looked into the glass of the clock because I wanted to see if anything looked back. I saw the lobby reflected in the curve. I saw the stacked cases of napkins in the corner. I saw the bulletin, board with the photo of the missing healer with one white paw and a reward written in red that had faded to the color of weak strawberries. I saw the entry doors beyond, and in the glass of those doors I saw the parking lot stretched blown wide. A white reefer sat on the far edge again, gleaming under the floodlight, its temperature unit ticking the seconds like a second heart. The cab door opened and a woman climbed down. She had black hair tied back. She was wearing a torn nightshirt and bare feet black with grit. She turned her head as if she had heard someone call her. The lobby was empty, and yet I had the absolute conviction that she had heard the building. She walked past the vending machines. She left no wet footprints on the floor. She stood under the clock and looked up at it like it was a doctor giving bad news. Her eyes were silver in the fluorescent light. Her mouth moved. She said a name that wasn't mine. The second hand on the clock stopped on 13. The thinness pulled like a muscle cramping. The drill fell out of my slack hand and hit the tile. The noise came stuttering as if the sound had to thread itself around something invisible before it reached my ears. I bent to pick it up, and my finger brushed the tile where I expected the drill to have left a bruise. And the tile felt cold, not an air conditioning cold. A crisis room freezer cold. I straightened and the woman was still standing there with her head tipped back. Her lips were moving faster now. Her voice had the same faint whine as the reefer unit. I thought she was waiting for me to tell her the time or to ask me if I had seen a boy. Instead, she stepped toward me. Or she didn't. It is hard to record the actions of something you are not certain is entirely present. The space pinched. The smell deepened. My bones felt very dry in my body. I said aloud the time like an idiot. I said 2:13. Her eyes snapped from the clock to me. That was the worst part of the night, watching eyes that might not exist see you completely. She opened her mouth wider than a woman can open her mouth without tearing something that matters. Air moved in the room the way air moves when a train pushes through a tunnel you were standing in by mistake. Then everything released. The second hand should have clicked to 14 and did. The air thickened back into air. The vending machines hummed like machines again. An insect tapped the glass and could not get through. The woman was gone. My chest burned with the urge to cough. The clock ticked. The lobby was a lobby. You think that is the end or that I called someone? I did neither. I stood very still and felt the place settle around me. I picked up the drill. I finished tightening the lower screw because it had been about a half turn short. And there is nothing worse than a cheap clock hung loose on a cinder block wall. I wrote my end of shift note and said I had installed the clock and it appeared to be working, and that we needed new anchors because the wall around the bracket had begun to crumble. I included no mention of boys or trucks or women with silver eyes. I drove home on the access road with my headlights picking out the roadkill and the beer bottles and the shine of eyes in the ditch that could have belonged to a cat or to something else. I slept 4 hours. I dreamed of a clock face floating in dark water with the second hand held just off by a hair. When I woke, my jaw hurt from clenching. The next night, I arrived 15 minutes early and found a note from Tony saying the clock had stopped at 2:13 and restarted at 2:14 without anyone touching it. He had written a smiley face like he wanted to turn the hour into a joke. The building felt sober with the dusk heat still trapped in it. I stared at the clock and at my notes, and then at my hands. I washed them twice and got to work. At 1:50, a woman came in holding a paper map. I watched her stand under the clock and try to make sense of the lines and the counties. She struck me as someone who had lost her people on a trip with too many turns. She asked me whether the road south would be open after midnight because she had heard on her radio about a fire near the highway last year. I told her the road was open and safe and that last year's burn was a memory like any other. She smiled without conviction and left. At 2:10, a boy with an orange hoodie walked in with wet hair and asked me if I had a pump for a bicycle tire. I pointed to the air station near the pet water. He nodded, smiled, and then stopped. His mouth worked around a sentence. He asked me the time. I said 2:12. He looked relieved. He nodded again as if that had saved him. He turned and walked toward the door. His shoes left no wet marks. He vanished as his reflection crossed the glass. I felt a pressure in my chest like a big hand had pressed there. I counted backwards from a number I hadn't thought about since algebra. I took one step toward the door and stopped. I could not say why. The reefer's heartbeat began again in the distance. The second hand on the clock touched 13. The thinness dropped. The smell rose. The boy did not return. The woman did not appear. The lobby held its breath like a child hiding, and then the hour let go. We replaced the fourth clock in August because the casing cracked. The state never loves to pay for the same thing twice and despises anything that needs to be bought 4 times, but they sent another anyway. It has hung since. If you pass through on a late night when the air has turned thin as paper and you feel what people call a draft but isn't one, you might find yourself under that clock. You might look up at 2:13 and notice how your watch disagrees. You might smell a faint burn smell under the bleach. You might hear a faraway engine change pitch. You might see water gather and not drip. You might feel your name called in the voice of someone gone. You will be tempted to wait to see what arrives. Don't wait. There are doors that open by being looked at. There are hours that have learned to look back. I still work there. Night is when I can hear myself without the static of other people's hours. I have changed a few things. I keep a towel under the counter and a new battery in my pocket. I have a phrase set in my throat for when somebody asks the time and I think the truth will do harm. You learn the way you learn to drive on ice. I have also learned that the cold is not cold like weather is cold. It is cold like an absence where something should be. It has a shape. It has a taste. It is the flavor of the end of a cigarette. On a night you wish you had not lit anything at all, the clock still stops at 2:13. It doesn't need to be on the wall to stop. It will do it on the floor. It will do it if you leave it sitting on your lap and leave the hole in the wall empty, and the hole will sweat anyway. It will do it if the power is out and the building is only a box of dark, and the second hand will find a way to tick just far enough to show you that even the dark has rules. Some nights the reefer idles and leaves. Some nights a boy walks in and vanishes. Some nights that woman comes to stand in her torn nightshirt under the ticking thing and look up with eyes I don't want to meet, and I do anyway. I tell her the time. I tell her 2:13 because it is always that, and I watch her mouth move around my answer like it hurts. There are people who think the world is ordinary and that the unordinary is an error to be fixed. There are others who think the unordinary is a sign and that it will save us. I don't think either. I think the unordinary is like the highway at 2 in the morning. It is just there. It will slide by you and you will slide by it. You don't want to be the one who pulls over to see what the light is. You don't want to be the one who looks up too long. You can keep going, and you should. But if you stop, if you stand in the thin air and smell the faint burn smell and hear the breath in the wall, you will learn what time is for 1 minute a night. It is not a line. It is a circle that collapses in on itself and then straightens and goes on. It is a frozen wheel that turns and looks like it doesn't. If you come through sometime and you ask me what time it is and the hour on the clock says something your watch doesn't, I will tell you whatever saves you. Then I will take my mop, and I will step into the lobby, and I will try not to be there next to you if the second hand stops. I wish I could say more. I wish I could say less. The truth fits in my mouth like a bad tooth I keep tonguing even though it hurts. The truth is that the clock above the rest stop lobby froze at 2:13 a.m. on multiple nights. The staff replaced it 3 times. It always stopped at 2:13. We replaced it a 4th time, and it stopped still. Somewhere between Corsicana and nowhere, a stretch of highway learned to wake a minute every night that it isn't supposed to, and it is never alone when it does. I took the job on Highway 59 because I thought it would be quiet. Nights in the piney woods hum like a power line, and if you stand still long enough, the trees sound like they're breathing. You think that's peaceful, until you're the one with the keys to every lock between Livingston and Lufkin, and you're the one who has to swing open the restroom doors at 4 in the morning to make sure nothing ugly got left behind. There's a certain kind of silence in those tiled rooms. Before dawn, the kind that swallows a man's cough. It makes you keep your footsteps soft even when you know you're alone. When I started, they gave me a plastic caddy full of cleaners, a roll of thick trash bags, a stacked ring of keys like something a jailer would carry, and the rule sheet. Everybody jokes about state rules until they're the one being written up over linen service receipts. I scanned down to item 12, noted in red by a previous supervisor who'd pressed so hard the pen gouged the page. Mirrors must be streak-free by 6 a.m. Beside that, in pencil, someone had written, "Good luck with that." I laughed. I was still new enough to think the scribble was a joke from some tired guy on his way out. The rest area sits where the pines crowd close to the highway, a clutch of buildings with long eaves and vending machines that grind out lukewarm sodas in summer and blink like stranded satellites in winter. The picnic tables are set at angles under a shelter of steel and creaking beams, the kind of place church groups pass through on their way to Galveston, where there's always a little girl dangling her legs off a bench and a mama counting juice boxes. I'd stopped there as a teenager on late runs to Nacogdoches, and I never imagined it was a place that could get under a man's skin. Then I took the job. On my 3rd day, I walked into the women's restroom just before dawn and turned on the lights. The fluorescence buzzed, then steadied. The mirror over the sinks was big, a slab bolted to the wall with metal brackets. There, near the bottom right corner, was a small printed hand. 5 chubby fingers, palm the size of a baby's. You know, how a kid presses their hand into a fogged window and pulls it away and there's that clear shape inside the fog. This was the reverse. The glass was clean. A perfect little handprint had bloomed out of nothing. It was subtle enough to miss, if you weren't the one paid to notice it. I leaned in. The lines looked swirled, smudged, oil and something else, the way a child's hand would be after it's been on a bench and then in a bag of chips and then on a dog and then on its face. I could see where the pad of the thumb ended. I could see the faint crescent moons of tiny fingernails. I looked at the door. It had been locked all night. I looked at the window, a square cut high under the eaves, too small for even a desperate teenager. I wiped the print away with a rag and glass cleaner, then wiped again and polished. The mirror gleamed. I made a note on the sheet in the supply closet about the women's side needing extra attention. The next morning I found it again. Same place, same size. Routine is a thing you either love or you don't. I'm the kind of man who likes that. You can look at a clock and know what the next half hour will require of you. November came, and with it the mist that rises off the low places and turns the headlights of the long hauls into fuzzy cones. The pines dripped. The picnic tables had a damp skin, and the trash cans smelled of rain and stale sunflower seeds. Each morning I would sweep the floors, refill the paper, wipe the counters and then the glass. I would erase that little hand and step back and watch the mirror dry. And each morning, there it was again. Sometimes if I lifted my own hand toward the spot, my skin prickled as if the air remembered. I asked Charlie, the dayman, if he was screwing with me. Charlie's the kind of old that has a clock built into his bones. He's always there 10 minutes before his shift, and the coffee in his thermos tastes like burnt bark. He frowned as if I'd asked him if the sky was up. "You'll see things here," he said. Truckers on no sleep. High schoolers liquored up and looking for a place to puke where their mamas won't find them. That handprint doesn't get you written up if the rest looks good. That handprint, I said carefully, has been there since I started. Charlie looked at me like a man trying to decide if someone is worth the trouble of telling. He scratched along his jaw. "You heard about 009? Before your time. Sunday after Thanksgiving, rain coming in sideways. Mama left her baby in a carrier by the sink for a minute while she went to fetch paper towels. Said she turned around and the carrier was empty. Cops shut the place down. They found the little one in the trash barrel outside, curled up and breathing like a kitten. Nervous kid from Jasper had snatched her as a prank. Says he doesn't remember a thing except a hand on his shoulder that felt colder than a fish. He swore he put the baby down as soon as he felt that hand. Judge sent him to a place in Rusk for a year, last I heard. I was here that day. There were handprints on the mirror then too. Lots of them. Baby ones. I told Charlie that sounded like a story truckers told to give themselves a scare when the caffeine stopped working. He said maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, and he went to empty the recycling. After that, I worked faster. I made sure I got to that mirror sometimes before 4, sometimes after. I swapped cleaners, bought my own clamshell of microfiber cloths, tried different strokes like I was a barber with a temper. I wiped the mirror with alcohol. I polished it dry. I even tried once a gloved hand with vinegar. I would clean and then step back and wait for the smear to show, and it would. Sometimes I'd stand there and count to 100 and it would bloom while I was counting. Sometimes I looked away to check the stalls, and when I looked back it was there, as if framed by the fluorescent buzz. A state trooper named Hollis started stopping in around 5:45 because his patrol shifted east that week and he liked the vending machine coffee better than the one at the substation. He's got a square face and a way of squinting that makes you want to confess things you didn't do. He liked to talk about deer. I asked him, casual as sugar and coffee, if he'd ever heard of funny things on 59. He said, "Funny how?" And I said, like kids' handprints showing up where they shouldn't. He took a sip and looked at the mirror like it was a person who owed him money. "People see what they want. That's what's funny," he said. My aunt used to say a bathroom mirror is like an extra face in the room. You look too long, you'll start seeing another you that doesn't like you staring. Does your aunt work in mental health? I asked. She sells pecans from a stand near De Boll, he said. You keep it clean. That's what matters. He paused, then added, I'll tell you a thing since you asked. We get more abandoned cars on this stretch than any other east of Houston. No bodies, no notes, just cars. You wouldn't think. A mirror could make a person walk off, but I wouldn't swear in a court that it couldn't. He left with his coffee. The mirror showed the little hand, right where a child would look up and see herself small and round and a bit sticky around the mouth. I wiped it away and locked the door for an hour and took the keys to the picnic shelter to fix a loose bolt, and tried to tell myself I was being a fool in the oldest way, the way that pretends superstition is harmless as long as it doesn't. Have your name on it. Just before Thanksgiving, rain came down hard enough to knock needles off the pines. A family of 4 pulled in under the shelter and ate sandwiches like they were being punished, the wind catching at their napkins and sending them scudding like white moths. The little girl with them couldn't have been more than 4. She ran circles and then stopped at the edge of the slab and looked toward the restroom doors, not like a child eager to go, but like an adult checking a house they used to live in. I unlocked the women's room and held the door. The girl's mother herded her inside. I went back to sweeping needles, and that was when I heard the scream. It wasn't the panicked, strangled kind. It was a ragged sob of a sound that starts in a mother's chest and rips up through the throat before her brain catches up. I was through the door in a second. The mother was crouched by the sinks, arms wrapped around the girl. The girl wasn't crying. She was too busy staring at the mirror like she'd found a moth pinned under glass. There were 2 handprints on the mirror, one atop the other. The lower one was the one I knew. The upper was the same size, smeared, like 2 children had reached, up at exactly the same angle and pressed together. The girl lifted her hand and placed it where the lower print glowed in an invisible oil against the glass. Her hand matched. The mother yanked her away hard enough that the girl tripped and cried. For real. She said something to me I couldn't understand, a tangle of you need to fix this and what kind of place and I'm calling someone. She took her daughter out and didn't stop to wash their hands. In less than a minute their SUV was throwing up water from the lot, and they were a smear of red lights in the rain. I stood there alone. The 2 prints had begun to fade. I felt something in the back of my neck, not a hand and not a breath, but the idea of both. The suggestion that an exhale had been cut short an inch behind my skin. I wiped the mirror. When the cloth came away, there were wet crescents in the rag. I swung it over and wiped again and made it clean. I left the room and locked it and told myself I had done the right thing by making it shine. That night I dreamed I was mopping the women's floor, and the water in my bucket turned gray and then black, like the residue from old charcoal. I kept mopping because that's what you do when you have a job, even if the water isn't right. When I wrung out the mop, tiny rings clicked against the bucket. I reached into the black water and pulled out a plastic bead bracelet like the kind kids make, the stretchy elastic kind with letters on it. The bead spelled ALY. The last bead was cracked. My alarm woke me before I could look for the missing letter. When I unlocked the women's in the morning, the smell hit me first. Not sewer, not bleach. A sweetness like freezer-burned birthday cake. The handprint was lower than usual, down near where a baby might have pressed her palm if she'd been standing on tiptoes and squealing at herself. The sight of it made my eyes water. I wiped it. It smeared rather than vanishing, like something trying to keep hold. I went into town late that afternoon. The ground was sponge soft. The day drinkers had given up on the bar near the feed store and migrated in their caps and vests to their trucks, the way men of a certain age migrate without making it look like leaving. I went to the library because that is where you go if you need to learn something and don't want to ask the people who know. The librarian's name tag said Marjorie. She had that slow smile older women get when they decide you aren't trouble. She listened when I asked, in the most casual way a man can muster, about little girls and Highway 59 and 10 or 15 years ago. She asked me why, and I said I remembered a story from a cousin. She took me to a microfilm cabinet so old it looked like it should have its own obituary. We scrolled the Lufkin paper, late November 2009. There it was. Infant found safe after scare at 59 rest area. 4 paragraphs. No name given, of course. The article quoted a DPS spokesperson using words like misunderstanding and quick response. It mentioned an unnamed teen. It mentioned a smell of cheap perfume, which I thought was odd for a newspaper to note unless the reporter had been there, and gotten that strange sense that smell means something when sound fails. I said, I appreciated it and started to leave. Marjorie stopped me with a hand not much larger than the one on the mirror. Are you the new night fellow? She asked. I am. You keep it tidy out there. My sister drives a school bus and sometimes she stops with the kids after football. She lowered her voice. Don't stay in the women's room when you don't have to. Why not? Just don't, she said, and the way she said it made me not ask again. The hand came every morning. After a while, waiting for it felt like waiting for a late bus you know will still show. It slid around the mirror sometimes, left sometimes, more centered others. Twice I found it so high up it would have belonged to a child held in someone's arms. That didn't sit right with me. The day after Thanksgiving I found 3 prints at once. 2 were smudged. 1 was perfect. The perfect one had a hair across the palm. It was blonde, fine as cobweb. I felt something change in me then. There's a line between I've got a weird detail to tell people at the deer camp, and I'm in this whether I like it or not. It's an invisible line. You only know you crossed it when your body knows before your head. That night I taped a piece of butcher's paper over the mirror, not because I believed that would matter, but because I needed to feel like I had done something different. I cleaned the sinks, pulled the trash, checked the stalls, then went back and looked. The paper was smooth and blank. I locked the door and went to the men's. When I returned half an hour later, there was an imprint on the paper, a faint curve where a small palm had pressed from behind. I want to tell you I laughed then. People say laughter is the body's way of handling what the mind won't. I didn't laugh. I stood very still until my legs cramped, and then I backed out of the room the way you back away from a snake. I locked it and went outside and watched the highway. Trucks hissed. The taillights made red commas in the mist. Somewhere a dog barked twice. I called Hollis at the substation. He came in with the look a man has when he's had 2 hours of sleep. I showed him the paper. He touched it with a knuckle. His voice stayed even because that's what he's trained to do. You ever think, he said, that maybe you're not the one being haunted? You think the mirror is? I think places are like people, some get bruised easy. He peeled the paper up. The glass shone. The handprint bloomed a second later, right where we both were looking. It was small and sure of itself. He took a photo with his phone. The photo showed a clean mirror. He took another. Clean. His face changed the way a weather map changes when the front rolls in faster than predicted. He touched the mirror with his fingertips like a man testing a stove. He pulled his hand back and looked at his skin. Nothing. Keep it clean, he said softly, as if anything else would be asking too much, and left. The Sunday after, a church van from Navasota pulled in just after dark. 10 kids piled out, dragging their laughter like ribbons. The driver asked if the water fountains worked. I said yes. I pretended to check something by the doors because I didn't want to leave the women's side when those girls trailed in, with their high voices and damp hair and the smell of winter coats. One of the older girls, maybe 13, lagged behind. She stood by the sinks while the others used the stalls. She didn't look at herself. She looked at the mirror like you look toward a dark window when you can see your reflection, and not what's outside. She's little, the girl said without turning her head. Who? I asked. The one that touches the glass. She wants to see over the edge. The girl's friend shouted from a stall and she startled and rushed away like a bird. The two of them left laughing. When they were gone, the mirror showed the handprint, high again, as if placed by someone tall, helping. I brought a small ladder from the supply closet that night. I carried it into the women's room and set it in front of the mirror. I reached up and checked the bracket that held the glass. The screws were tight. I looked for cracks along the edge. There was nothing but my own face and the rattle of the vent. When I stepped down, the ladder creaked like a voice trying to be gentle and failing. I felt tired in the eyes. You can wear out a part of yourself you didn't know could tire until it sends a message up to your skull and it hurts behind the sockets. I locked the door and went outside and stood under the eaves and listened to the rain. A semi boomed by, the kind that makes the ground tell your bones it's still here. I started waking at 2:15 exactly. It didn't matter if I'd gone to bed early or late. I would open my eyes and the night would be black enough that I could hear the highway before I saw it. In the quiet apartment above the maintenance garage, the cheap wall clock ticked with such intent it sounded like a second heart. Once, I went into the little bathroom down the hall and stood in front of the cabinet mirror with the light off. I waited. When I let out the breath I'd been holding, my breath made a pale ghost on the glass. For a half second, that mist held a shape like fingers. Then it thinned and left me with nothing but my own face and the echo of my own breath like a stranger across a room. December bled in. The highway changed character. The deer went a little stupid. The tourists thinned. The men in the parking lot had a migratory pattern like geese. You could tell by the angle of their shoulders if they were heading for Houston or heading home. Christmas lights showed up before they should, strung on the shelter in a half-hearted zigzag by the day crew. The mirror kept getting its visits. Some mornings I'd find the handprint low and sure, some mornings high and smeared. Once, there were two prints, different sizes, the smaller overlapping the larger like a shy little sister hiding in her mother's skirt. On a Sunday shift, an older woman came in when the rest area was nearly empty. She had a cardigan wrapped tight and eyes that had learned how to carry a load without asking for sympathy. She walked to the mirror and stood too close, lips moving. She touched the glass with a finger. I was going to tell her not to, because oils are a devil to remove, but I didn't. Her finger left no mark. She turned and saw me and smiled in a way that showed she had decided something. "I used to stop here," she said, voice barely above the fluorescent hum. "My daughter and I. She liked the machines that took your quarters and gave you little plastic rings. I was thinking just now I would have bought her a nicer ring if I'd known." "Did something happen?" I asked before I could stop myself. "Everything does," she said. "You keep it clean, honey." Then she left, and when she had gone, the mirror held a low handprint that made my own fingers cramp. That night, I went home and took a shoebox from my hall closet and dumped its contents on my kitchen table. Tickets, old receipts, a resistor, from a radio I'd ruined in high school, 2 photographs of a woman I knew once and lost, because that's what happens when you value silence more than apology. I pulled out a keyring with a sharp little hand-shaped charm. I'd bought it on a whim at a gas station near Shepherd. The hand was a child's, outlined in silver, the kind of thing meant to dangle and catch light. I took it back with me to work and looped it on the belt by my keys because it felt like doing something. Around 3 in the morning, a fog rolled up from the ditches and wrapped the rest area like an old coat. The lights looked soft. The vending machine buzz felt far away, like a mosquito behind glass. I stood outside the women's room door with the charm turning at my hip, and I put the key in the lock. It was raw cold. The hinge squealed. The overhead light came on and made everything too bright. The mirror was a blank slab. I closed the door behind me. The room felt full, not with people, but with leftover sounds. Drips, the settling tick of the metal vents, the kind of tiny noises a space makes when it remembers being used. I set the little ladder in front of the mirror and climbed up. I reached behind the top bracket to feel the edge of the glass. Something cold touched my wrist. So cold it stung. I jerked back and smacked my elbow on the bracket and almost fell. My boot heel slipped on the ladder rung. I caught myself with my forearm across the top of the mirror. My hand left a streak of sweat that looked like fog until it dried. Then, in the place where my wrist had been, a small handprint appeared, perfect and calm, like it had been waiting my whole life for that particular second. I said out loud, "What do you want?" Because I had to ask something. The fluorescent hum made my words sound cheap. The print did not change. It did not fade. I stood there until my toes ached from gripping the ladder, and then I did the one thing I hadn't yet done. I pressed my own hand over it. My palm swallowed it. For an instant, the glass felt like the inside of a freezer. and underneath that, softer, a give like someone pressing back. I pulled away. I wiped the mirror. I left the room and locked it. I went outside and looked at the highway until my eyes stung. Then I went back in and unlocked the door and went straight to the mirror, and there was nothing. No handprint. Just my own tired face staring back. The next morning, Charlie didn't show. His wife called to say he'd had chest pain. I turned on the TV in the maintenance office and watched a rerun of a game and turned the sound down. The quiet got into the vents. Around 5, I went into the women's room and found, not a handprint, but a word. It was a smudged series of letters low, as if scrawled in a hurry by someone too short for the sink. Ailey. The letters were backwards, the way writing always is in a mirror if it's on our side. The A looked like a triangle a child might draw. The Y curled wrong. I reached and touched the bottom of the Y. It streaked like oil. I cleaned it until nothing remained, and then I went to the office and sat with my hands against the sides of my head until the vending machine clunked and made me jump. I told no one. What would I have told? The mirror spells things sometimes, in a hand small enough that my finger could cover a letter. That I go home and stand in my dim bathroom and stare at myself until I'm sure I see someone behind me, and then I flip on the light and of course no one is there. That I started carrying a bead bracelet in my pocket, though I had never owned such a thing, and if I ran my thumb over the beads, I could hear rain from a decade ago against the shelter roof. It got worse in a way that felt like it had always planned to. A week before Christmas, a man in a denim jacket came in, moving with the tight steps of someone trying not to think about the cold. He washed his hands, dried them with an efficiency that said military or mechanic, and turned to me in the doorway. His eyes had that shine people get when they've been awake too long or crying too hard for too many hours. "You work here at night?" he asked. "Most of them. You ever find things in there?" He nodded at the door to the women's. "Like what?" "Like hair ties, or little socks, or a bracelet with letters." "I find all kinds of things," I said carefully. "We keep a bin. Day crew logs it. You can check with them." He stared at me like a man staring at a window during a storm, hoping the glass will hold. He said, "We stopped here when my daughter was 3. She's 14 now. We stopped last week too. The mirror was clean." He paused. "It looked clean." "I keep it that way," I said. He looked down at my keys. The little silver hand charm swung and caught the light. He stared at it until something changed in his face. Not relief. Something like recognition in a dream. He reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out a ring of plastic alphabet beads tied with a frayed pink ribbon. "Alyssa," they said, not Ailey. The last A was cracked. He closed his fist around it and put it back in his pocket like a man who had decided to take his problem inside where it would be warm and unsolvable. "Have a good night," he said, and left. On Christmas Eve, the highway was a ribbon of lights. Men who hated singing hummed anyway. The trees wore frost and the ditches held a thin ice that broke like glass under boots. I took a thermos and poured coffee that tasted like pennies. I cleaned the men's. I cleaned the women's. I left a candy cane on the shelf where women set their purses and a note in my neat blocky hand that said, "Mary." When I came back half an hour later, the candy cane was on the floor, broken cleanly in 2. The mirror held 2 handprints side by side, one smaller than the other. I stood there and I spoke to the glass. Not because I'm a man who talks to walls, but because sometimes the air around an object gets so full of what people bring to it that it feels rude not to add your offering. I said, "You're seen. You're not left." It felt like a foolish, sentimental thing to say. It also felt like the only honest thing I had. The prints faded. I went home to my apartment after midnight, and the medicine cabinet in my bathroom showed a haze that could have been from the shower. I hadn't showered. I wiped it with my towel, and there, for the first time, another handprint bloomed in the cleared spot. It was smaller than the one at work, as if distance and thin walls had shaved years off whatever made it. I stood in the cold bathroom and said, to the mirror or to myself, I don't know, "I can't fix what happened." My mouth made fog in the dim and then none at all. I did a thing then that most people would call foolish and some would call kind, and one woman, a mother from a small church, later called blasphemy. I stopped wiping away the print first thing. I let it be. I cleaned around it. I polished the glass like a jeweler around a flaw and kept that flaw intact. I watched parents come in and glance at it and then quickly not glance at it again. I watched little girls run their tongues along the gap where their front teeth used to be and go on with their lives, busy with things that matter to little girls and not see it at all. I watched older women go still and touch their purses the way people touch the headstones of the living. It lasted a week. Then a note appeared beside the print, not in oil, but on paper, taped hard enough to wrinkle. "Stop it," it said in the pen stab, handwriting of someone brave enough to speak but not brave enough to sign. "Stop what?" I said out loud because I am stubborn in small, stupid ways. I pulled the note down and folded it and put it in my pocket and felt the letters press into my thigh when I moved. On a Tuesday when the sun came through the pines like something filtered and holy, a school bus pulled in. The driver was Marjorie's sister. She raised 2 fingers at me from the window like a salute. The kids spilled out and ran for the vending machines. One little boy stood apart. He had a cowlick that defied his mother and a jacket with a broken zipper. He watched the girls disappear into the women's, and a look crossed his face that was so old it made my throat hurt. He was 8 or 9 at most. He looked at me and said, "There's a girl in there that can't get tall." "Sometimes," I said. "We all can't." He nodded like I'd told him something grown, and he went to kick at a bottle cap and pretend to be a pirate, and the bus driver called out that they had 5 minutes, and time behaved itself, which is a miracle when it does. January came and made the pine needles glitter. On a Thursday morning, I turned on the light in the women's room and there was no handprint. The mirror was blank and cold. I waited 10 minutes. Nothing. I cleaned the mirror anyway because that is what you do when the rule sheet says, mirrors must be streak-free by 6. I locked the door and went to the men's. I came back. Still nothing. Something in my chest let out a thread of air I hadn't known I'd been holding since before I had keys. I did something then that I am not proud of. I smiled at the glass in relief the way a man smiles at a road when he finds his way again after taking a wrong turn. The mirror, in answer, bloomed the largest handprint I'd yet seen, a smear that was still undeniably a child's but stretched wide and high, a shout instead of a whisper. It made my stomach jump like I'd crested the hill on a roller coaster. I said without meaning to, "Okay, okay." I cleaned it away with quick apologetic strokes. I turned the light off and on. The room hummed. The print came back, same place, a little fainter. I left it. I stood outside the door and kept watch, like a guard. Around 9, a woman in a black coat came in. She was unremarkable in every way except that she moved like the air was thicker for her than for the rest of us. She washed her hands slowly, a ritual way, humming without sound. She looked at the mirror and at the handprint, and she didn't startle and she didn't smile. She touched the glass with 2 fingers alongside the print, not on it, as if putting her fingers near a child's fist. Then she took a small plastic bag from her coat pocket and held it up for a second. A bead bracelet glimmered inside. This one spelled Alyssa, the last A replaced. She tucked the bag back into her coat and she left without a word. Outside, in the gray morning, she stood by the trash can and lifted her head and breathed, and then she got in her car and drove away toward the north. The handprint on the mirror faded so slowly I could count its departure. The next day it was back. Of course it was. Things like that don't resolve because someone does something generous. In a parking lot, they stay, in the way that a road stays worn by people meant to move on. But something had changed. The print sat a little lower. It seemed less frantic in a way only a man who has stared too long at glass can tell. The room felt less crowded, with breaths that weren't mine. For 2 weeks the new pattern held. Some mornings it came late. Some mornings it didn't show until the sun cracked the trees and pines wrote slow green lines across the sinks. One night in my apartment, I woke at 2:15 for the last time. I went into the bathroom and stood at the mirror. The medicine cabinet did not show a hand. It showed a soft place where one might be, a hint. The kind of hint you get when a person you love leaves a coat over the chair because they will be back. I stood and watched until my eyes burned. I put my hand up and pressed it against the glass, and in the cold, I thought I felt the faintest pressure back, and whether I did or not doesn't matter. I knew then what I needed to do. I took a drive on my day off. North out of Lufkin, past the old feed store with the red roof, past the little stand where Hollis's aunt sells pecans in a cardboard tub. I turned off where the highway dips near a drainage creek, a place where a sedan had sat for 3 days the previous spring with no driver and a seat for a child. I pulled off on a service road and walked down among the pines. There are places where the highway noise turns into a low prayer. I found a cluster of trees where the ground was spongy and smelled like mushrooms. In the crook of a big pine, I wedged the little silver hand charm from my keyring. I hung the bead bracelet I'd bought at the gas station beside it. I didn't say a prayer because I'm not a praying man. I said, in a voice that felt like it belonged to someone who had learned something the slow way, "You're not forgotten. That's all I've got." Back at the rest area, the women's mirror held a small handprint. It was so faint I had to angle my head to see it. I left it. A woman in a blue sweater came in with a child who moved like a sparrow. The child stood on tiptoes and made faces at herself and giggled. The mother looked up at me with that quick look women give the men who clean bathrooms, a flare of gratitude and worry, and then she saw the faint print and frowned like a person puzzled by a word on a page. She said, "Thank you for keeping this place nice," and put her hand on her daughter's head and pushed a curl behind a tiny ear and left. Weeks passed. The handprint didn't disappear. It learned my name. It moved inches, not feet. It paused, as if listening. I cleaned around it. I took a photo that finally showed it, a soft suggestion. I taped that photo in the supply closet beside the rule sheet, and in pencil under "good luck with that" I wrote, "It's not luck. It's attention." In late March, a storm took the power for 6 hours. The rest area held its shape in the dark. The vending machines died with small, shameful clicks. I stood in the doorway and watched lightning carve the trees into bones. I went inside the women's room with a flashlight and set it on the sink, pointing up so the mirror was lit like a camping story. On the glass low and near the lower right, the handprint glowed wet. I did not wipe it. I did not try to call anyone. I stood and I watched, and I said, because I had nothing better, "I'm staying until morning." A gust pushed rain against the window so hard it sounded like a crowd. I stood and I stayed. At dawn, the power blinked back. The handprint was gone. In its place was the faintest trace of a streak, as if someone small had dragged a hand down the glass from a higher place to a lower. Not in panic, but as a gesture of lazy contentment, the way a child drags a hand along the side of a car as she walks because the world is there to be touched. I wiped that streak away and polished the mirror, and for the first time since I started, the glass held nothing underneath. You expect me to say that was the end. That's the way we like our stories. After I locked the door that evening, I drove to the little shrine I'd made without calling it that. The silver hand had tarnished. The bracelet was damp and gritty. I cleaned them both with a cloth I kept. In the glove box, I said, "I'm here," to no one. The wind moved like a whisper that didn't require an answer. I drove home and slept through 2:15. For a long time, the women's mirror was ordinary. Harmful things were left by the sinks, of course. Lipsticks, a ring once, a folded note with someone's secret, but the glass was just glass. Once, in June, I thought I saw a smudge, and my breath stuttered like a man who sees a familiar silhouette down a long hall. It wasn't a hand. It was a mouth print from a teenager with cheap gloss. I wiped it with the exasperation a man reserves for the still living. In September, I changed apartments. I packed my bathroom mirror last. It was cheap with a thin edge and a little rust in the corner. When I peeled the backing tape, I saw on the inside of the glass the faintest map of oils in the shape of a hand. It was so faint that if I'd blinked, I would have called it nothing. I stood in my empty bathroom and held the mirror up to the light. The hand was small and lower right, and exactly where a child would leave it if she climbed to see. I smiled then, not in relief, and not in fear, but in the simple recognition of a face you have come to know. When I hung the mirror in the new place, the hand was gone. I don't mean it was wiped away. I mean that when the light hit the glass just right, there was no faintity, no suggestion. It was a clean, blank, ordinary mirror in a man's ordinary apartment. I keep the little silver hand on my keyring still. People sometimes ask if it's for my kid. I say no and let them make the story they need. When I work the early shift now and my breath comes out white in the winter, I hold the women's room door open for mothers with babies. I tell girls with braids where the paper towels are. I tell boys who peek in that they can't be in here. I clean the mirror like it's a window and something on the other side might be comforted by seeing itself. Sometimes when I polish the lower right corner, I feel the tiniest bite of cold against my palm. It's so small I think I imagine it. I polish anyway. I step back. I wait. The glass holds my face and the room behind me and the pine shadows in the high window. On certain mornings when the fog is thick and the highway has its own mysterious voice, a woman will come in and wash her hands and stand a little longer than necessary. She will look at herself and then at the lower right of the mirror and she will see nothing but a very clean pane of glass. She will nod to me as if I've done a job that matters. She will leave a small thing behind, a barrette, a plastic ring, a hair tie with a pink heart. I will collect those things and put them in the lost and found bin. At the end of the month, if no one claims them, I will take them to the pine where the silver hand hangs, and I will lay them at the base like small offerings to a quiet place that didn't ask to be holy, but was chosen by the simple fact that people lingered there with their fear and their love. And sometimes, very rarely, I will come in before dawn, and the mirror will hold a single breath on the glass, low and round, like a circle drawn by a mouth that giggled while it fogged. I will stand and watch it fade, and I will not wipe it away until it is gone by itself. Then I will clean and polish until there is nothing left but a room that looks ordinary in the fluorescent lights, a row of sinks that shine, and a highway out there in the pines that carries everything that can be carried, including the things we didn't know we could lift until something small reached out from the cold and asked us to. I don't talk much about that night, not unless I've had a couple of whiskeys in me, and even then I usually laugh it off like it was nothing. But I'll tell you now, because maybe writing it down makes it feel less like I imagined the whole thing. Maybe if I put it into words, I can convince myself it really happened the way I remember. I was on the road between Austin and Dallas, heading north on I-35. I'd been visiting my sister in Round Rock, stayed too late, and decided to drive back up to Fort Worth instead of crashing on her couch. It was one of those humid August nights where the air never really cools down, and the highway felt endless. Blacktop stretching ahead with only the glow of truck taillights to break up the dark. About 20 miles south of Waco, my eyes started burning, and I realized I was too tired to keep going without a break. I spotted the familiar blue rest area sign and figured I'd pull in, stretch my legs, and splash some water on my face. The lot was almost empty when I rolled in. A couple of semis were parked at the far end, drivers asleep inside, and right near the middle sat a beat-up white Ford pickup, the older square body kind, maybe late 80s. It was idling, headlights on, a thin ribbon of exhaust curling into the night air. The driver's side door was cracked open just enough to notice, and the cab light glowed faintly inside. I parked a few spaces away and just sat there for a second, engine running, watching. Something about that truck made me uneasy. The way it was parked crooked, one tire over the line, like the driver hadn't cared. The way the radio inside was playing so low I could barely catch the twang of some old George Strait song when the breeze carried it. I figured maybe the guy had stepped out to use the restroom, so I climbed out of my car and headed toward the building. The cicadas were screaming in the trees, loud enough to drown out my footsteps, and the air smelled like cut grass and hot asphalt. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The place was deserted. Not a soul in sight. Even the vending machines seemed quieter than usual, their little cooling fans barely humming. I went into the men's room, did my business, and washed my face. The water ran lukewarm, metallic tasting. I remember staring at myself in the spotted mirror and thinking how empty the building felt. Like a stage set after the actors had gone home. When I stepped back outside, the first thing I did was glance toward the pickup. My heart gave a little jump. The truck was still running, but now the passenger door hung open too. Wide open, like someone had just climbed out. I froze. The lot was still empty except for the semis parked far away. No movement, no footsteps. Just that damn truck, idling and humming, headlights blazing white across the concrete. I told myself, maybe the guy was walking his dog somewhere around the grassy picnic tables. Maybe he was just out of sight. I forced myself to walk back toward my car, but I kept looking over my shoulder at that truck. Something in me didn't trust it. That's when I noticed the mirror. The driver's side mirror caught the glow of the overhead lot light, and in it I saw a face. Pale, expressionless, just hovering there in the reflection staring straight at me. I spun around, heart pounding. Nothing. The driver's seat was empty. The lot was silent except for the steady rumble of that engine. When I looked back, the face in the mirror was gone. I didn't think twice. I scrambled into my car, locked the doors, and started the engine. I pulled out of that lot so fast my tires squealed. As I merged back onto I-35, my hands were slick with sweat on the steering wheel. For the next 20 miles, I kept glancing in my rear view. Every time I half expected to see that old Ford following me, headlights in my mirror, but the highway stayed empty, just me and the occasional semi rolling past. About half an hour later, near Hillsboro, I spotted a state trooper parked on the shoulder. I pulled over, heart still racing, and flagged him down. He rolled his window down, and I told him everything. About the truck, the open doors, the face in the mirror. I sounded crazy, I know. But the trooper just listened, calm, like he'd heard it all before. When I finished, he nodded slowly and said, "Son, you're not the first person to tell me about that pickup." I just stared at him. He leaned closer, voice dropping low. "That old Ford's been reported a dozen times over the years, always at that same rest area, engine running, lights on, nobody inside. By the time we get out there, it's gone. Every time." I asked him if maybe it was just some local screwing around, a prank. He shook his head. "No plates, no registration. Doesn't match anything in the system. Best we can tell, that truck shouldn't even exist." I wanted to press him, ask more, but he just tipped his hat and told me to drive safe. Like the conversation was over, I got back in my car and kept driving. But I swear, for the rest of that trip, I felt eyes on me. Every shadow on the highway seemed darker. Every set of headlights in the distance made my stomach clench. And here's the part I don't tell most people. 2 days later, when I drove back south toward Austin, I passed that same rest stop. In the middle of the day this time, sun high and hot. The lot was empty except for one vehicle. That same white Ford pickup parked crooked, sun glinting off its windshield. Engine running, doors closed. I didn't stop, not even for gas, and I've never stopped at a Texas rest area alone at night again.